Noting that it is 7:02, I will call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call is next.
Alder Allen.
I'm here.
Mayor Arata Frada. Alder Gerhart.
Here.
Alder Herbst.
Here.
Alder Jetzer.
Here.
Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Alder Strassman. Alder Udell is absent with excuse. Alder Wheeler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Yay. So the next item is the approval of minutes of the May 24th meeting.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is public appearances for non-agenda items. I have no registration slips. It appears there is nobody online, so we will move on to item number 6A, which is the Financial Management Plan and Referendum Overview by Misty and a representative from Ellers, who I don't think I'm familiar with you. Cool.
Yeah. Why don't I start real quick, if that's okay?
Yes, I will have you start, Misty.
Excellent. So yes, this is Greg Johnson from Ellers. He is part of our external financial advisor team. They're a big part of what helps the city run our financials, especially with debt issuances and TID activities, and then also this annual financial management plan. So the bulk of the presentation will be Greg. It will be very similar to what we've done in other years, just updating it for the new information. But I also did ask Greg to spend a little bit of time talking about some other funding options that the council would have. So he's not going to go into a lot of depth. It's going to be very high level. And my hope is that after that presentation, council can give me some sort of an indication of, we're interested in learning more about this one and this one. This other one I'm not at all interested in. Don't waste your time. And just kind of give us a little bit of direction on how you would like us to proceed with providing information and options to you in the future. So with that, I will turn it over to Greg.
Thank you, Misty. Good evening, everyone. We're going to cover several different topics, as Misty mentioned, as part of the annual financial management plan update. Really, some of our primary purposes here are to review some of the existing financial metrics that the city has in its financial policies in regards to fund balance, debt service, and some other key items. A big part of the financial management plan is really an integrated financial forecast that looks at a long-term trend for the village's levy or city's levy to fund both operations and to fund the city's capital improvement plan. So we have taken the existing capital improvement plan that's been prepared, and we've modeled out for 10 years kind of full funding of that capital improvement plan, so you can see the fiscal impact as it stands presently. Really, this is intended to serve as kind of an initial framework for your upcoming 2024 budget process. Typically, as we've done this in late June, it kind of serves as an initial kickoff to kind of see where the city is trending in terms of its overall tax levy and tax rate, look at the sustainability to fund the capital improvement plan as presented, so kind of provide a multi-year framework as you begin your budget deliberations for 2024. And as Misty mentioned, this year we've added some additional content on some alternative revenue sources to determine if you view some of those as being appropriate for further exploration. We're happy to assist with that as you deem appropriate. One item we typically like to address is some highlights from the city's rating with Moody's Investor Services. The city has a double A1 rating with Moody's, and they provide a third-party assessment of your overall financial condition as well as kind of your overall economic development and growth trends within the city. The city has historically fared very well with this independent review. It occurs when the city issues debt annually, but then Moody's also issues an annual comment just to kind of keep investors current on the city's overall financial condition. So some of the city's long-standing financial strengths have been your fund balance, balance, and your general liquidity, your cash on hand. So fund balance, or we're going to talk about your fund balance policy, is really one of the key financial metrics that the city has direct control over. It really represents your ability to have reserves set aside for any unforeseen emergencies, provide cash flow for operational purposes throughout the fiscal year, and reserves are viewed as a key financial metric in assessing a community's overall financial health, and the city has always done exceptionally well in that regard. In terms of the overall growth that the city has experienced over the past several years, it's trending above Moody's AA medians that they really calculate on a national basis to kind of look at comparable communities throughout the country. Your strong growth has helped kind of push you above those median levels. And then your leverage, which they typically define as debt and pensions, is kind of below the AA medians. So typically, Wisconsin communities score very well on the pension metrics as a result of the Wisconsin retirement system, well-funded, well-managed system, recognized nationally, and that favors well for all communities in Wisconsin that participate in that because it keeps, the overall financial leverage for retirement and pension at a manageable level. And then your debt management, they view, has been strong as well. So the good news is that when the city goes and gets its rating from Moody's, very strong rating, they look very favorably upon the steps that the city takes to secure its financial stability long term. So encourage all of you to continue doing what you're doing because it is getting positive results from the rating agency. So in terms of some of the specific financial policies that we provide an overview of each year, just to kind of see how those are trending long term, we'll talk about your general fund balance policy. There's also a debt service policy that looks at your expenditures for debt service as a percentage of your overall operating budget. And then there are specific policy metrics that we look at for your tax rate for debt service and your general obligation borrowing limit, which I'll go in more depth in terms of each of these policy metrics. So first is your general fund balance policy, and your policy states that your unassigned fund balance would be 15 to 25% of your revenues. So this chart shows going all the way back through audited results from 2013 through fiscal year 2022 that shows where your unassigned fund balance has been as a percentage of revenues. Has been very healthy historically. We've noted some of the reasons for some of the fluctuations over the years, but I mean the city has historically, when it's used fund balance, has used it for permitted purposes, and what I mean by that is typically maybe some capital items or non-recurring expenses that that's how you're deploying your fund balance, and that's really the key to successful management of your fund balance, is not using your reserves to fund ongoing operational expenses. Hiring a additional staff person and then using your fund balance to pay for that is viewed very unfavorably because that revenue source is not sustainable. Once you use your fund balance, it's deployed. If you have an ongoing expense, that's not a way to fund that long term. So, the city's fund balance metrics have been very strong, and this is what I meant when I said that the rating agencies have looked very favorably upon the city's liquidity and fund balance management. Another metric that we look at is your general obligation debt service expense as a percentage of your total general fund, library, and debt service expenditures combined. Your policy states that you should stay within 15 to 25% of all of those expenditures combined in terms of debt service being a component of it. Here we just kind of show how that is trending going forward. You're staying within those policy parameters. In 2022 and 2023, those percentages are a little bit higher, but that is due to the fact that the city has paid off debt early related to its tax incremental finance districts. So as the fund balance in TIF districts had built up to the point where you could call and prepay the debt early, that's all positive because you're no longer incurring the interest expense on that debt. It just shows up as part of your debt expenses. So that's why some of those years are a little bit inflated, but that's not a bad thing because it's just higher because you paid debt off, made a larger principal payment in those years. So within what we're forecasting for full funding of the capital improvement plan, if that were to occur, you're still within this policy metrics for your debt service expense policy. So some of your other debt metrics refer to your tax rate for debt service per thousand of value. Your policy is not to exceed $2.25 per thousand. We'll talk more about the long-range capital model in a few moments, but the average from 2024 to 2033, kind of our planning period for the financial management plan, is $1.02 per thousand, so well under that not to exceed amount. In the 2022 plan, when we looked at a similar multi-year planning horizon, you're at $1.13 per thousand. So that average tax rate for debt service has come down in the long-range model this year compared to last year. Your general obligation debt capacity, what that refers to is the amount of principal that you can have outstanding for general obligation debt. General obligation debt is the most common form of debt for Wisconsin municipalities. It is legally backed by an irrepealable tax levy, and the principal amount that you have outstanding cannot exceed 5% of the city's total equalized value. But you have kind of a policy that restricts that further, that you would not exceed 60% of your allowable debt limit. Your maximum utilization in this plan is 35%, so you're well under that maximum not to exceed amount. In 2022, the highest utilization you're at was about 36%. So not significant change in that from last year to this year, but shows even if you did fully fund everything in the capital improvement plan as it's laid out presently, you would still be well under your geodebt capacity metric that you have set for not to exceed. Next, we're going to transition into talking about, setting up kind of the discussion about your long-term trends for your overall property tax levy and your property tax rate. And when we look at the tax rate per thousand of value, we're basing that off of the city's equalized value excluding your tax increment district, so what we call your TID-out values. So as you have several TIF districts that are active that have seen an increase in value since those TIF districts were created. That value is not available to apply towards your levy for all your operational funds and your debt service and capital outlay until that district closes. So this is really all of the value that's outside of your TIF districts. So what we show here is kind of the trend in your TID-out values on the top half of this chart. Shows how the TID-out value has grown from valuation year 2018 to 2022. Seen some significant increases in your TID-out value from 2022 to 2023 that encompass some closures of TIF districts and also factors in additional value that the city received from absorbing a portion of the town of Madison. Looking at our projections going forward over the next 10 years, we've deliberately tried to be conservative with our projections. For the values that will be certified as of January 1 of 2023, that's what's in the valuation year chart. Those numbers will be available on August 15th of this year. You will see the benefit of the TID-4 closure, all of that incremental value returning to the tax rolls. That's over $242 million of taxable value that will be returning to the tax roll. That will be available for your 2024 budget. And then TID-15, which is the TID district that the city absorbed as part of the town of Madison, that closure will impact the 2025 budget. Outside of those TID closures, we're really projecting that your tax-based growth would be approximately 5.62% per year. So that's relatively conservative when we look at what your change has been over the last 5-year period. We've essentially taken your average growth over the last 5 years and discounted it by 50%. So we're trying to be conservative, so we're not coming up with a tax rate that we feel is conservative in terms of looking at this long-range model. Yes.
Is that
when you say the 5.5% projection, is that based on growth, or is that based on, like my neighbor sold his house for way more, and every one of my neighbors, all our neighbors are going to get their assessments jacked up? Is it a combination of those two?
It's a combination. So in terms of economic, your equalized value changes as a result of economic change, which is just appreciation or changes in property values just due to market conditions. Then there's new construction activity that also drives the value. And then the other category can include corrections that may have resulted from one year to the next based on Board of Review adjustments or other adjustments that were necessary. And then for now, there's personal property that's included in those valuations as well. In terms of, I want to make the note between the distinction between equalized value and assessed value. So equalized value is really akin to a market value. The reason we use equalized values for projection purposes is it kind of neutralizes the whole reassessment process. So with your assessed value, you have an assessment ratio, which is a percentage how much of your market value you're assessing for each property. And then your assessment ratio changes year to year. And then when it gets down to a certain level, you will do a partial or a full reassessment that will bring that assessment ratio back up to market, closer to market value. So we kind of use the equalized value because it kind of neutralizes that assessment ratio, the fluctuations, and then timing out when that reassessment's going to occur. So we're just wanted to make that comment since you kind of mentioned reassessments. This is kind of on a market value basis that kind of takes that into account.
Thank you.
So in terms of our methodology that has been used in our operational forecasts, we work collaboratively with Misty to kind of help do the operational forecast. And we've used a similar methodology to what we've done before, which is, trying to be very conservative in terms of projecting growth and revenue going forward. Most of the city's non-levy revenue sources, that can include everything from licenses and permit fees to fines and other charges are relatively consistent from year to year, and we see that statewide. There's not a lot of typically fluctuation in those items. The shared revenue increases from the budget bill, at least in this particular model, we were conservative and did not incorporate those, but that is going to help your model now that that has passed. But there are some specific guidance that's been provided in the budget bill in terms of how some of that increased shared revenue can be deployed. So it has to go towards some specific services. And I know in conversations with Misty, there's likely already areas where that's likely going to be deployed and utilized. Some of your other intergovernmental revenues, your road aid revenue, we've kind of forecasted, to see some slight increase and then kind of level off. And then most of your internal administrative charges that the city makes to its utility and its library are increasing at a rate of about 5% per year. So in general, this is pretty much in line with the forecasting methodology that we've used for several years, but that's also based really on the trends that we see each year when you have your audited results from prior years. In terms of the general fund expenditure methodology, most of the departments, that are highly wage-driven, those wages were kind of increasing by about 5% per year. Other expenditures were increasing in a range of 3 to 4% per year. And then allowances have been added within the model to reflect increased costs for the operational side for implementation of the city's long-term capital improvement plan. So kind of factoring in some increases for your ongoing costs and then factoring in just some other allowances for costs in relation to the impact of ongoing investment in capital items within your CIP.
Greg, I'm going to just take a little break here. Who can tell me, is this slide deck going to be part of our agenda packet?
It's actually on the city's website already. If you go to Departments Finance, there's the financial management plan is posted out there.
Okay.
Would you like a hard copy?
No, thanks. I just wanted to know how hard I needed to take notes.
So it's just the PowerPoint slides itself, not the narrative that Greg is providing, but yeah, that's posted out there right now.
sure you're not desiring to hear that again, so the narrative, so hopefully the slides will be adequate.
Oh, you're being recorded, so
Oh.
we can play it back for posterity.
Or lack of sleep, so whichever.
That's the other thing I was going to mention, if I may, real quick. So Fact TV is taping it now so that it can be broadcast later, even though it's not being broadcast live currently.
So using that methodology for your general fund revenues and your general fund expenditures, we've summarized, your typical categorization of revenues and expenditures for the general fund on this chart, and, forecasted a balanced budget going forward. And you can kind of see your change in expenditures for the general fund are kind of ranging at a little over 4% per year, stabilized kind of once you get from 2027 to 2033, and some little bit higher levels kind of going forward in the interim period. So, this just kind of shows, as I said, kind of continuation of your existing operations, factoring in some additional allowances for operational impact related to some of the capital improvement plan. So this is one component of the overall financial model that we're going to look at. It's the largest component in terms of your general fund. That's the most significant component of your property tax levy, and is where all of your primary operational expenditures are occurring. Next, we kind of look at the library fund, similar methodology to what we looked at for the general fund, and just kind of showing kind of a forecast for revenues and expenditures for the library as well. So the library is also a component of your overall property tax levy, and so we've kind of forecasted out, that impact in terms of, the levy component needed for the library. So as we've made a couple notes here on the slide, the expenditures don't consider the capital project costs, that would be funded by some of your equipment replacement fund balance. It's kind of outside of the operational model, but the model illustrates the impact of levy increases that are kind of tied to your net new construction allowances under levy limits, which we'll discuss in more detail. A new component to your property tax levy, beginning with the 2023 budget, was the transit fund. So that now is also part of your overall tax levy for the city. So we've projected that going forward with a balanced budget out through 2033. So this is kind of a new component to when we look at the overall tax levy and tax rate projections. It will incorporate the transit fund going forward, similarly to your levy for the 2023 budget.
Just a quick question on that. So that's because we applied directly for the state aid versus going through Madison Metro?
Exactly. It used to be part of the general fund, and then now that we're grossing it up, it's a separate standalone fund.
Yeah.
And then the kind of opposite of this would be Fact TV, which used to be a separate fund and is now part of the general fund. So that's why it fell off this presentation,
Yeah.
but it's still obviously funded.
And if I recall correctly, that we ended up getting more money having to go through directly through the state, even though we had more administrative responsibilities because we applied for it. But we ended up getting more money from the state than we got as a pass-through.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
So next, we're going to transition to another component of the city's overall levy, which is your levy for general obligation debt service. So the city has annual principal and interest payments that it makes each year and other expenses related to debt issuance that you budget in your debt service fund. And then the city applies several non-levy revenue sources to help make a portion of those debt service payments. Consists of revenues from several of your tax commercial finance districts, some application of impact fees related to the fire station, and then some special assessment revenue. And then often when the city issues debt, we get what's called a premium, which is some excess money that's provided to the city upon the sale of debt that can be used to make debt service payments. So we've kind of forecasted all of those revenue sources, or what we call abatement sources, to apply towards your annual principal and interest payments, and calculated a net debt service levy. So this chart looks at your existing levy for debt service, not encompassing any future debt issuance. We'll look at the impact of future debt issuance in a moment. Your levy for debt service in the 2023 budget, just to put that into context, was approximately $4,497,000. So we're going to look at how that levy will change going forward if we encompass the full funding of the capital improvement plan. But this kind of shows where we're starting from before we add in any additional debt. Just for reference, I've just included a project list, which is kind of an excerpt from your full capital improvement plan that identifies all of the projects that were identified to be funded through debt issuance. We take all of this information and kind of put together a long-range financing plan that takes into account a variety of factors. The useful life of the asset, which would determine how long we will amortize the debt. We take into account statutory considerations that determine, what type of general obligation debt you can issue. There's general obligation notes, which have a term up to 10 years. Any financing greater than 10 years up to 20 years is called general obligation bonds. So we take those into consideration. And then finally, we take into consideration, revenue sources that you're going to be using to repay the debt. So some of your projects that are being financed have some assessments tied to them. Others are related to tax incremental finance districts. So that debt service would be repaid by the TIF revenue. So this is just an excerpt from your capital improvement plan that shows how we're financing those projects identified to be funded with debt. So really within the plan from 2024 to 2032, as it stands presently, you have about 67 million of projects identified to be funded with debt. So looking at, the tax impact of kind of full funding of your, capital improvement plan over this 10-year period, that's what we've summarized here in comparison to your existing debt. So as I mentioned, your levy for debt service for the 2023 budget was approximately $4,497,000. So that results in a tax rate per thousand of about $1.05 per thousand. So a $300,000 home, for example, in 2023 paid about $314 just for debt service, city debt service. So then we factor in future debt issuance for all those $67 million of projects from 2024 to 2032. This shows how the debt service levy would change. So the debt service levy increase from 2023 to 2024 in this model is higher. It's about an $836,500 increase. That was set higher because of the closure of TID District Number 4. You're going to see a significant amount of new value come onto the tax rolls, which will help, positively impact your tax rate. So we've tried to kind of amortize the debt a little more aggressively, but still, provide a tax impact that's reasonable. So that's why that levy increase is larger from 23 to 24. But using that same $300,000 home that paid for debt service in 2023, about $314 per year. In 2024, that total would be $335 per year. So that's the annual difference that they would be paying. So it goes from $314 to $335. And then we show from 2025 through 2033, we've structured the payments so your debt service levy would increase consistently per year. It's about $200,000 per year. This is full funding of the capital improvement plan as it's laid out presently. So it's kind of an all-in model. I mentioned one of your financial policy targets is your general obligation debt limit. So this shows, the percentage of your debt limit utilization if you had full funding of the capital improvement plan. At the end of fiscal year 2022, at the beginning of this fiscal year, the city was at about 27% of its debt limit, had 171 million of borrowing capacity remaining. With full funding of the capital improvement plan, you would go to about 35% of your debt limit. So from a debt limit standpoint, I think these numbers are are manageable. You have more than adequate borrowing capacity from a legal standpoint, and your overall utilization, is, I don't think would cause any overriding concerns with the rating agency. It's really more about affordability and the impact on the tax levy and the tax rate. In terms of your legal capacity to finance projects, you're in excellent position. So the multi-year budget forecast kind of rolls up everything I've been discussing up until this point. So again, to recap, all the aspects of your levy include the general fund, the library, transit. You have a levy for capital outlay that kind of builds up funds to pay cash for capital projects, which is an excellent financial practice. You've got your existing levy for debt service, and then the proposed debt service levy for funding of new capital projects. And then we incorporate your capital improvement plan. So everything that was identified to be funded with debt is included in this model. Those projects that are related most specifically your TIF districts, the TIF districts would pay for their proportional share of the debt. And so we really are looking to illustrate the long-term impact of the full operational and capital needs of the city. So we've broken down the forecast kind of into two periods of time. So we've shown some historical information from 2020 through the 2023 budget. And then we show projected on this slide from 2024 to 2027. So the total levy is in the first line that's kind of shaded in gray. So that's the total amount of property tax levies that you would levy for all of your operational funds, capital projects, and debt service. And then we show that percentage change year over year. So from 2020 to 21, you're at about a 4.85% increase. 21 to 22, it was about 8.32%. And then from this most recent budget, the increase was about 6.85%. And we show how that's trending over the next several years. Then we show what your equalized tax rate would be per thousand of value for the city's overall budget. And then for a $330,000 home, we show what the annual property tax payment would be just for the city portion of the property tax bill. But this, again, this encompasses the full operational and capital and debt service budget. So it kind of shows how that is kind of trending going forward and kind of where that tax rate is projected to be. So you'll see from 2024 to 2027, your tax rate for debt service, remains relatively stable, right around, mid $6.55 per thousand of value. So it's a very consistent and stable impact kind of on this full funding model. Looking then beyond 2027, out from 2028 through 2033, you can kind of see how that tax rate is, again, kind of projected to remain stable, and then starts to see, even some potential declines further out. This is a very long-term model. Looking out 10 years, if I knew exactly where things were going to be in 10 years, I'd probably be sitting on a beach somewhere. But nevertheless, it gives you kind of an indication of how things are trending going forward in terms of your property tax rate. So the property tax rate is remaining relatively stable, which is always good to see in kind of a long-range model. Shows that things are being structured from a budgetary impact to try to have a consistent impact from year to year. In terms of your overall tax levy by purpose, your budget is very consistent from year to year. The majority of your property tax levy in this model goes towards your general fund. It's the largest component of your budget. And then we see kind of the breakdown in terms of what's going towards library, capital projects, existing and proposed debt, and transit. Really just kind of shows that things are remaining very stable in terms of where the property tax dollars are going year over year. So to kind of summarize kind of the long-range financial model, if we look at the average total levy increase from the 2024 budget to the 2023 budget, that's total levy, operations, capital, and debt. That average annual levy increase is about 5.53% per year. The model is in compliance with your debt expense, your debt tax rate, and debt capacity policies. But as we'll see, there's still some, levy limit gaps that do persist in the model. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I mean, overall, in terms of the model, in terms of the impact, it's fairly consistent year over year. So I don't know if Misty, if you had anything you want to add at this point?
I do not, thanks.
Any questions so far? I encourage you to just interrupt me as you have any questions.
Bill?
Yeah, so we're in a pretty good financial situation, yet the levy limit gaps persist. So are you implying that this is essentially not our fault? This is like a defect with the state?
It's really, the model, if everything could be funded based on what you needed, the fiscal impact is relatively stable. Then when we look and say, what's our ability to implement that model under the levy limit constraints, that's where we start to kind of see some gaps. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But yes, I mean, you're living under kind of levy limit constraints now, in the levy limit gap I'm going to show you does not include the impact of some of the increased shared revenue, so that will help to some extent. But it still kind of indicates that, there's things that kind of need to be monitored going forward. Typically when we've done this presentation, we've kind of identified some similar trends, and, the city has always done a good job when you go through your budget process of making those adjustments as needed to make sure you still achieve a levy that's in compliance with levy limits. So, it's not uncommon that you kind of start at this point, but then as you go through the process, you make those necessary adjustments.
One thing I'd add is that I really see this as kind of framing our reference point as we're going into the budget. Greg talked about the broad percentages that we use, right? So we use 5% increases for personnel costs. We use 3% kind of inflation costs, flat revenues. All those things still actually need to be calculated and finalized. This just kind of gives us a starting point as a frame of reference.
So you had mentioned way earlier the $224 million that's being added back into because of the TID closures. Does that increase our ability to, does that increase what we can spend under the levy limits?
When a TID district closes under your existing TID districts, you do get a one-time allowable levy limit increase, which gets calculated. So you essentially get about 50% of the credit for 50% of the incremental value that's been generated within that TID district. So we factored that in to the levy limit analysis that I'm going to speak to in a few moments. But yes, you do, the full amount of the incremental value gets added back onto the tax rolls, but then how much you can then turn and levy gets restricted under the levy limit laws.
So theoretically, it would reduce property taxes for everybody else in a perfect scenario.
Yeah, theoretically, half of it can be used to increase your levy. Half of it goes to property tax relief at a very high level. That's the easiest way to summarize it.
The only thing, of course, I feel the need to clarify is that we did spend that already in the 2023 budget.
Right.
So even though we just closed TID 4, that adjustment that we're going to get and is factored into here, that has already been accounted for and spent in the 2023 budget.
Now, how does that, so we are in the process now of closing TID 15, and I don't know if you are aware of that.
Yes.
And then we're going to reopen TID 16, which, so the current value of those properties in TID 16 will still be taxed at those rates, but as there's an incremental, presumably there will be a value increase as things happen, although I haven't seen the project plan for TID 16 yet. Was that part of the referral last night?
It should have been. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's correct. So when you create a new TID district, the existing value that's there at the time the district is created, which is referred to as the base value, the city and all the other taxing jurisdictions can continue to collect their proportional share of tax revenue on that value. As that value appreciates, or there's new construction activity in a TID district, that increase in value is called the incremental value. All the taxes collected on that incremental value, the city retains to pay for the expenditures within the TID district, and then when the TID closes, all of that value goes back onto the tax roll. So you'll be seeing the benefit of the closure of TID 4 for the 2024 budget with that value returning to the tax roll, and then the next year for TID 15 for the 2025 budget, all of which we factored into these calculations.
Gabriel.
So in terms of the shared revenue, just because that's such a huge curveball in all of this that's not incorporated, and obviously we haven't seen this in the last several years, since I've been on council, how do we, is Ellers and or the league or somebody going to be providing guidance for us as we go into the budget process about how to make educated decision? I mean, my guess is that we probably will take the money, but obviously there's a lot of strings attached that could make things complicated in the future, and there's a lot going into that. So are we going to be able to get guidance? Is there going to be any work on maybe updating some of these projections just for context as we go into the budget later in the year?
So we will be taking the money because they'll be giving it to us, and the strings are kind of a separate package, right? So we have to follow the strings whether we want to or not, so we might as well take the money. So that's part of it. I know I'm on the board for my professional association, and we're working with the DOR to start getting some more guidance out there. You know, the bill has been signed, or it's now a law, but all of the details haven't been figured out yet. So the DOR needs to figure that out, and then we're going to help coordinate statewide webinars and things to help kind of learn how to do the filings that we have to do and that type of a thing. So it's still too early to say how that's all going to shake out, but it is fantastic news.
So the legislature just threw more money in the shared revenue pot. And somewhere along the line, there are guidelines about how the Department of Revenue has to divide that up among all of the various municipalities in the state. And that particular process has been a constant bone of contention because without adding more money, they've played with the formula. They've done all kinds of stupid stuff over the last 20 or 30 years. So when will we have some idea how that's going to shake out as far as what we can expect?
So we know how much the true City of Fitchburg amount is going to be. That has been released. The big piece that's still a question mark is how the DOR is going to handle the Town of Madison piece. So the Town of Madison was allocated additional shared revenue because it was based on 2022 population, but they don't exist anymore. So we expect that we'll get kind of our share of that amount, us in the City of Madison. But we don't know exactly how they're going to divvy that up yet. So that's the only piece that's still kind of a question mark for us and is very unique. There's no other communities, I believe, that have that question mark.
We love that, though, don't we?
It's been a doozy. Yep.
And within the budget bill, they've come out kind of with general guidance in terms of how, there's going to be essentially kind of two buckets of the shared revenue, kind of the current revenue bucket, and then a second bucket that's going to have to be spent on, particular types of services. And then in addition to that, there's other provisions in the budget bill that are what are called maintenance of effort, which the, municipalities are going to have to demonstrate that they are continuing to maintain funding for specific services by meeting, some specific criteria that has been specified. So, we at Ellers have been tracking this pretty closely along with the league. We'll kind of be providing some guidance as this kind of comes out. I think so it's more to come, but it's becoming clearer, but there's still more information to come. Well, we'll talk a little bit about levy limits. So in terms of all the city's components of its levy, everything is subject to levy limits with the exception of debt service. Debt service is exempt from levy limits. So your general, library, transit, and capital levies are all subject to the same statutory limits. So what is that statutory limit? It means that you can increase your levy from the prior year by a percentage increase due to net new construction. So that's a percentage that gets released annually by the Department of Revenue in August of each year, and that defines what your allowable levy increase is going to be. And then there are other adjustments that are permissible under the levy limit law, some of them, more applicable than others. Debt is the most common adjustment. This past year, for your 2023 budget, the city got a additional levy limit adjustment as a result of the town of Madison absorption, and there's a few other, modest adjustments permitted under the statutes. The city this past year also used the allowance increase for joint fire and EMS departments, but those have to be evaluated on an annual basis. But debt is the primary adjustment that the city uses and is used throughout Wisconsin. So this is the levy limit forecast. Really want to just focus on the bottom line. Only way to get to the gap is to actually go through the nuances of actually calculating the levy limit increase going forward. We've kind of assumed a conservative net new construction, of about 2.8% for next year and about 3% for several years, and then in 2029, decreasing that down to about 2%. So what we're showing, for the levy limit gap, just based off your current budget profile, for 2024, that gap would be about $775,000, and then it would start to kind of increase and fluctuate going forward. Again, does not include the increase in the shared revenue, but you kind of know how that's going to be deployed. But it does include the adjustments for the tax and commercial finance districts. So you'll get, an additional levy limit increase for TID 4 for the 2024 budget, and then for TID 15, more modest levy limit adjustment for the 2025 budget. But other than that, we've just forecasted increases due to net new construction. So, I think what we've been seeing statewide, particularly in the last 2 years, is a lot more communities starting to see levy limit pressures. Communities that had levy limit flexibility have seemed to kind of exhaust more of that over the past couple of years than in years prior. I think the shared revenue is going to help. It just, will come down to if that's enough to kind of sustain things going forward. But I think, in my own opinion, I think there was some recognition that, after 17, 18 years of levy limits, things were getting pretty tight. So certainly the shared revenue increases will help, but still important to kind of keep a multi-year perspective to kind of see how this levy limit gap is whether or not it's going to be adequate to kind of keep up with growth needs within the city. So in terms of kind of budget guidance, this is kind of a menu of things that the city does and does well through your budget process. It's just kind of a reminder, as you start the budget process, to kind of keep these types of items, into context. Certainly what your tax levy impact and tax rate impact is going to be to your taxpayers. At the end of the day, you're all in the service delivery business. That's what local government does. Public safety, public works, your park and recreation, library, all the great services that the city provides, that's where your property tax levy dollars go. So trying to, make sure that you're continuing to make those correlations in terms of how your budgetary resources are deployed and how those services are being provided to your residents. Are there any, permissible decreases in service levels that could result in some cost savings? And, exploring those in time to, make sure they can be implemented in time for budget adoption. Continued prioritization of your capital projects, which, the city does exceptionally well, looking at, what is affordable within your overall levy components, what can you continue to pay cash for and avoid borrowing, all the things you're typically doing through your capital improvement plan management. Looking at your levels of debt, and then, as I've mentioned, your fund balance is your primary credit strength within your direct control. The city has a good history of when it's using fund balance to deploy it for one-time or capital projects, not using it for recurring costs. So all the things you're doing, you're going to continue to do in terms of kind of making these prioritizations. It's just kind of, again, keeping that overall guidance of trying to tie service delivery to your funding levels to make sure your citizens and your business community understand, how you're allocating the dollars and for what purpose. Before I kind of transition to the final piece on the alternative revenue options, any questions so far? So I have here a list of kind of the menu of the options I'm going to touch on. As Misty mentioned in her opening comments, I'm just going to provide kind of a high-level summary of these. A lot of these we can go a lot more in depth, but I think we're happy to do that if you determine it's appropriate to kind of investigate this further. Levy limit referendums in terms of kind of the financial horsepower of this menu. This is going to provide you, the most financial resources should you need it. Your property tax levy is your primary revenue source, so if you seek some increases in that above and beyond the net new construction, that potentially and most likely provides you with a more sustainable revenue source going forward. The rest of these, the impact fee, the street light user charge, wheel tax, transportation utility districts, and payment in lieu of taxes, I would kind of put more in the supplemental category. There are ways that you can certainly raise some additional revenue outside of your property tax levy, but it's really kind of to supplement your overall revenue stream. Doesn't provide necessarily the same financial wherewithal as your property tax levy would if that were to be adjusted through a referendum. So if the city decides to consider a levy limit referendum, there's kind of some general policy discussions that have to really guide that referendum process and what you would put forth to voters. So these are statutory requirements. So the first is if you are going to propose a levy increase, you need to specify the duration. Is it going to be for the next fiscal year only? Is it going to be for a specified number of years, or is it going to be ongoing? So you're required in the levy limit question to specify the term that the levy increase is going to be in place. You're also required to state what the purpose is going to be for that additional levy authority. You can tie it to specific services or service, or you can tie it to multiple services. And that's, again, really a community by community decision in terms of how you make that determination. We've seen communities want to be very, specific in terms of what services they are asking for increased levy authority. So they will have a levy limit question that maybe is tied towards police or tied towards fire or public safety in general. Other communities we know maybe that we've worked on with referendums, they may be seeing more fiscal pressure related to a specific service, but in order to keep funding that service, they've had to make cuts in other areas. And so they want their levy limit question to be broader to not only maybe cover the primary purpose that their costs are going up, but to recognize that they've made cuts over a multi-year period in other areas, and they want to restore funding to those areas. There's really not a right or wrong answer. It comes down to what fits your operational needs and what do you think your citizenry can support in terms of a levy adjustment. But you're required to kind of specify the term and specify what the levy increase is funding. So there's a variety of procedures that you have to go through to do a levy limit referendum, resolutions that have to be adopted, specific question that has to be written to satisfy the statutory criteria, and then there's typically an extensive public education effort to make sure citizens understand what you're funding, what the fiscal impact's going to be, so they can make an educated decision when the referendum question appears on the ballot. Impact fees. What is an impact fee? An impact fee is a specific fee charged for a specific type of service or type of project that is tied directly to new growth. So you can only use impact fees to pay for specific types of services or projects that are directly related to new growth. If you're going to use an impact fee to pay for some kind of a utility project, I'll just use an example. Say you're going to use an impact fee to pay for a lift station. If that lift station is serving additional parts of the community and also is servicing an area targeted for new growth, you can only use the impact fee to pay for the portion of the lift station that's tied to new growth. The existing area that's served by that lift station is what the statutes call an existing deficiency. You can't use it to cover costs that you already need for your existing system. It can only be tied to new growth. So you can use it to pay for water, sewer, stormwater, solid waste, recycling, law enforcement, fire, EMS, libraries, parks, highways, transportation, facilities, and traffic control devices. That all comes out of state statute. That's what dictates what you can use an impact fee for. The process to implement an impact fees, you have to do what's called a needs assessment, which would calculate what the impact fee is going to be, specify the actual costs and what you're paying for, and then there's a public hearing that's required as well. The city has some existing impact fees, most notably for fire station improvements that were implemented to help provide some revenue that offset some of the debt service for fire station improvements. The only way you can collect an impact fee under statute is through issuance of a building permit. So it's important to time the implementation of an impact fee with particular growth and building permit generation. There's no sense in implementing an impact fee, and then if you're going to go through a period of minimal building permit activity, you're not going to collect a lot of revenue, and there are spending periods that have to be met in terms of spending down those proceeds. So again, an impact fee is a way to tie, collect revenue related to specific growth through when a building permit is issued. The impact fee gets paid to help pay for some infrastructure or project that's specifically tied to growth.
Could I ask a question on, you raised the issue, this isn't for you, Greg, but Misty and Chad, so I believe there's in the mayor, there's capital improvement for improving, I think it was Herman Road, and the rationale given was, well, it's seeing more traffic now with Terra Vesa. And I'm thinking, my district doesn't want to pay for that. Would that be something that we could impact fee against Terra Vesa? I was told it's being done because of increased pressure and usage, going to Terra Vesa. I'm asking the question, I guess.
So my understanding, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, is that for an impact fee, you'd have to have it established before the new building permits came in. So if we know that there's a bunch of new activity and we know there'll be some new roads that we need to put in, that's something we could consider as part of the needs assessment. But since Terra Vesa is already more or less in, that's already considered an existing deficiency at this point. So it comes down to a timing issue. But in theory, yes, transportation facilities like roads would be an eligible impact fee project.
Tell me, Jamestown residents have to pay for the road so the Terra Vesa people can get back and forth easier, is the answer.
It's citywide. That's the question.
Yes, so property taxes are across the city, yep. There are certain things that the city has a special assessment policy on. So certain things along those lines could be assigned to particular property owners. But in general, road maintenance is all across the city.
So the point I would make is, we have all this great growth, yes, but it always comes at a cost that comes around and bites the existing neighborhoods in the behind. Okay, that's all I'll say.
Julia?
So my question is, can we use this fee for the police station?
Yes.
But only the portion that would be for new growth.
Only the portion that's for new
New
growth.
growth.
So, you'd have to do some kind of, assessment in terms of your new facility, how much of that is needed to kind of house your existing personnel, how much of that is being, upsized to kind of handle growth in the department, to kind of handle additional growth in the city. At a high level, that's kind of how you'd have to kind of make that determination. So not the full amount, but a portion of it. Similar to what was done for your fire station.
Okay.
Exactly.
But we have done that, isn't it? So we
For the
have-
fire stations, we did. So, yep,
we know
we are nearing the end, I would say, of when we'll be collecting the fire impact fees. I think there's only a couple years left based on the projections. And so we had established, 10, 12 years ago, maybe 15 even, that we wanted to create that impact fee. And we did, the city did a needs assessment at that point and determined how much was for the existing, how much was for new growth. And then we've grown a bunch since then. So we were able to pay for a decent share of the new facilities that we put in using that funding, but not the whole thing. It was just a portion.
Is that a specific line item as revenue? Or is that part of the building and licenses and permits line item?
Nope, that goes to the debt service fund.
Okay.
And it goes to pay for the debt principal and interest payments we have to make on the 2 fire stations. So it goes directly to that.
So there's no special line item we could see how much impact fees we've collected over the last 6, 7 years?
Yeah, yes, there is. It's just in the debt service fund, not in the general fund.
Okay,
So
there's
yes, I
there's a
can
line.
provide a report if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what that is. Have we discussed impact fees for the police station? Or is that something that would happen during this year when we're discussing the police station in general?
So it's been mentioned as options, I'll say, in the past as we're going through kind of budget and CIP conversations, but in my experience, there hasn't been appetite by the council to implement a new fee. So if this council is interested in exploring that, we'd have to hire a consultant to help us with that needs assessment, obviously go through that process, but if the council's interested, we'd be able to explore that further.
Julia?
No, my question is, we can see how much is that in our water bill, isn't it? The fire impact, no?
Nope, that's different. So
Oh.
the fire impact fee is on the building permits. The fee you're thinking of is the fire protection fee.
Oh, okay.
So that would be the cost of the hydrants.
Okay,
Whose revenue is generated from new buildings and people that have to pay the permit for those buildings? Sorry, not the general taxpayer.
That's correct. So, you have a new single-family residential home that gets built, part of their building permit fee is the impact fee. So it gets built into the cost of constructing the home.
So just to like Alder Herp's point, it wouldn't be like a resident of a building that already existed. It would be somebody in, just uptown,
Correct,
building a building.
correct.
So that discussion was focused on the fire stations. What if you were to make a determination that we're going to see growth in this area that's going to require an additional 4 police officers? Would you be able to use an impact fee for funding an ongoing expense like that? How long does an impact fee go for?
You have 8 years from
8
the
years.
time it's implemented to collect, to expend the dollars.
But you can't use it on staffing.
No.
no,
It has to be on capital.
Gotcha.
yeah.
Julia?
Yeah, I think I forgot where I was. So no, my question is, so when we are calculating the fee, we are considering future growth. We need to have an idea how much is going to be that growth to include that in the calculation.
That's correct.
And how do we? Well, I imagine that we hire people that they know how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to lay out your methodology, so
Okay.
to determine that you've had a reasonable basis for
Okay.
determining what that calculation is, and that's part of the reason why there's a public hearing requirement, so you are required to explain that rationale and how you've made that determination.
And I have another question. And what is the average percentage that this impact fee, cover for, there is like a,
It's going to be.
10%, a 20% is,
It's going to be made on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's certainly likely not going to be the whole cost.
Yeah.
It comes down to what the methodology that you use and the rationale to determine the calculation, and it's defendable at the end of the day.
So I feel like I've heard Wendy for the library talk about some deadline we're going to hit with a certain number of residents that we're serving, that we have to increase the number of books. Am I crazy? What is that?
That's a statutory requirement and this was something we struggled with when we started to build the library, because the state requires that you have a certain number of volumes at different tiers of numbers of residents. So we are approaching a point where we're going to have to add a significant number of volumes, and that's one of the reasons why she wanted to change that shelving that we did a couple of years ago, was to kind of create the room, because you can't just keep putting unlimited books into the same building.
Yeah.
You have to have additional space. And so this is an issue that we are going to be running into pretty soon.
Well, it seems like an impact fee might be an appropriate use for that, because that's directly tied to the new growth of the city, the requirements Have we just explored that, or is that an option?
So that one's a little tough. So back to impact fees have to be for capitals. Like if we built an extension onto the building or we did another building, that's the type of thing an impact fee could go towards. But there is that 8-year timeline. So let's say we implemented a fee now. I have 8 years from when I collect it to spend it. And I would be surprised if we were going to build a new library within 8 years.
But it can't be a capital expense like within the library. It couldn't be like the new, the book sorter that costs $250,000 or $500,000.
Believe it's just buildings.
Just the
Yeah, that's
It's to be
a,
physical infrastructure. Okay.
yeah, that's a piece of equipment that we have to replace from time to time. Like the books aren't a capital expenditure either. That's part of our operating, that's just, because they replace books every year and they add new books to the collection. It's not like they're just sitting there on a certain number of books and that's all they're going to have. The library does add some number of volumes every year. But there's going to come a point where the number it's kind of like the same problem we've had with property taxes, is that we increase property taxes every year. We increase the tax levy every year a little bit, but it's not enough to keep up with what our needs are.
If we wanted to look at bus rapid transit, I know that there's a significant capital investment in that. Would an impact fee be appropriate for that type of investment?
I haven't heard of it before, but it
No,
doesn't
but
mean
it's
it's
part
not.
of a transportation
Yeah.
facility, so aspects of it could be.
And the station? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
So it wouldn't be more bus service, it would be like the actual, okay. With the library, I don't want to spend all our time on the library, but with the library question, let's say the library's stuffed, you can't fix it. Would we be statutorily required to build a new library? Would we be statutorily required to put books in some existing city building and call it a library branch, or how does that work?
The statute says that based on your population, you have to have a certain level of staffing and you have to have a certain number of volumes. I don't know that the state really gets into the minutia of how exactly you make that happen. I mean, I remember when we hired the original 14 staff members for the library, there was a lot of discussion about what those staff members would be, because there's, not all library staff are the same. So we have a library director, we have assistant directors, blah, blah, blah. So we just were told by the state that you have to have a certain number of FTEs, and that magic number was 14 because of our population. But as time has gone on, I think, aren't they up to 18 or 19 now?
Something like that.
I think, yeah. Yeah, as time has gone on, they've had to add more staffing because our population keeps going up. And the statute on libraries is very, very specific. And one of the things that the state says is no matter what happens in your community, you may not spend less on your library than you did the year before. So even if we were to have, even if we were to have a mass exodus of population, like maybe 5,000 people moved out of the city, you still wouldn't be able to reduce the amount of money you spent. You might not have to have as many staff, but you still have to spend the money on the library. It's a unique little thing in the statute.
Why aren't we, if the space is an issue, I'm sorry, I don't want to get off. I don't want to get off this, but why aren't we, it's a modern world, everyone's reading on tablets, and why aren't these, instead of more volumes, we're out of space, books on tape and e-books and things like
Well,
that? Seems like the obvious solution to me.
So
Shelf
some
issue.
of those things count, but there's a certain number of physical pieces of things. So like DVDs and CDs and the books on tape, those count toward our volumes. But the electronic resources, like if somebody's just downloading something from a Kindle, that doesn't count.
If I can bring this back to impact fees quick. So the other side of that kind of conversation, I just want to make sure that we're having in this too, is that If you have a new fee that goes onto the building permit, you will also have a concern from the development community and from the people that are building new homes. And while it's 100% justifiable, we went through the appropriate process, they aren't popular in that particular part of the people that we're serving.
What is the percentage increase? Like, how much is this? Is this increasing the building permit by 1%, by 5%, 10%? Like, what is the scale of the increase?
So it depends on, again, what that calculation is when you do the needs assessment. I can get what the fire impact fee that we have right now is on an average home. And then we also have a water impact fee currently. So I can get kind of a breakdown for that of you. It's in our fee schedule, but I can pull that together.
Because if the fire impact fee is coming close to the end of its life, like if we replaced it with a different impact fee, then it's kind of a wash if we're just putting it towards a different use instead of, yeah.
Correct.
All right, next.
The next option I wanted to discuss is a streetlight user charge. So this is really a user charge that is really specifically for recovering the annual cost for electricity used to operate the street lighting system. And again, the reason, communities may choose to do this is that may be part of their overall tax levy, that's how they're funding and paying for that electricity by creating a user charge that takes that's the revenue stream that's paying for that electricity. It frees up levy capacity to be, diverted from the electricity to pay for something else. So this hasn't been, widely used, but it's becoming a little more applicable. The Village of Oregon recently moved ahead with kind of creating a streetlight user charge. It's, an example. The Village of Prairie du Sac has also implemented this. The City of Rice Lake was the original community in Wisconsin, implemented this. The Village of Sauk City has implemented it, and others are considering it. How does the charge work? We've kind of given kind of the two most common methodologies that we've seen used. Per unit billing charge, so residential parcels assign 1 unit, to non-residential assign 2 units. And so that's kind of the basis for the charge. Or there could be like a flat residential charge with a footage charge for non-residential. We see that method being used by municipalities that, are maybe an economic hub for surrounding municipalities in terms of that footage method. So again, it's a way to kind of look at a expense that is being funded through your property tax levy and creating a different revenue stream to pay for that expense and freeing up that levy capacity for something else. And, there are certain types of services in statute, the levy limit statute, that are called covered services. And for some of those covered services, if you convert them from a levy-funded system to a user charge, you have to take a deduction on your levy limit worksheet. An example is recycling. Or garbage, excuse me. So if you have, if you convert some of that from levy to user charge, you have to reduce your levy authority. Street lights are not one of those covered services. So that's something you can convert to a user charge and not lose levy capacity at the same time.
Actually, this kind of jogs something in my mind here. For impact fees, could that be used to offset infrastructure costs in new neighborhoods? So essentially reducing this, the amount of funding that needs to go into the TID district?
Yes, you can use, if there's a infrastructure, in your example, road improvement that's needed to service new growth, that's eligible to collect an impact fee to help pay for a portion of that road. So if that, you mentioned the example of a TIF district, if you have a project in a TIF district and there's another revenue source that's available to help pay for that, whether it be impact fees, special assessments, or grants, you're required under the TID statutes to use that revenue to reduce the TID share of that cost. But yes, that's an option.
Well, in most cases, new developers or new developments pay the cost of the infrastructure going in. So that's not necessarily a city taxpayer expense. Obviously, down the road, after we've accepted those improvements, then we have the ongoing cost of maintaining those roads and ultimately replacing those. But for instance, with Highfield Reserve, the roads that are going in right now, those are on developer cost.
If we did a streetlight user charge as an example, would we be able to charge that differently within the urban service area and outside? I mean, we've got a significant amount of property that's outside the urban service area, and those users have very few streetlights out there, and I'm sure we have alders up here who might not like the phone calls they get as a result of that.
I suspect I'll help you out with this one, maybe Greg, and you can weigh in. This could be done something similar to like what we have with the adjustment we just made for the sidewalk assessment, the stormwater assessment for curb and gutter is what it was. So we have a different rate for those who are within the urban service area than we do for those who are outside the urban service area. So you could potentially look at it that way, or maybe the council would ultimately, through their needs assessment, determine that there's not enough density of streetlights, for instance, to even justify a charge out in the more rural area outside the urban service area.
So that, I'm sure you have this number right at your fingertips, Misty, but how much money do we spend on streetlights a year?
I do not have that number at my fingertips,
You're
but I can get
kidding.
it for you.
That'd be great.
And my understanding is that we're still doing the LED switchover, so the cost is presumably going down significantly over the next several years.
Right.
Hopefully.
All right.
Before you move on, I don't think, if I saw that slide correctly, we can't use the impact fee for anything other than the actual electricity. We can't do it to buy LED conversions or these sorts, or the streetlights themselves. Is that correct?
The impact fee or the street?
The streetlight user charge. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you
Yes,
say that one more time?
can the streetlight user charge be utilized for anything other than the electricity, i.e. the streetlight itself, converting existing standard lighting to LED?
We've primarily seen it for the electricity, but I mean, I think that'd be something you could look at exploring. Thanks for clarifying. So another option is it's commonly referred to as the wheel tax or the vehicle registration fee. This is an annual fee that a municipality can add to the state registration fee for motor vehicles. Applies to automobile registrations and trucks registrations for a particular size. All revenue must be used for transportation-related purposes. The Department of Transportation collects the fee and sends the proceeds, on for use by the community. Some of the kind of pros and cons of the wheel tax. It's authorized by statute. It's very easy to set up and administer. It's the bulk of it is really handled kind of at the state level. It provides a stable, revenue source. And the fee that you choose to implement is established directly by the Common Council. Some of the disadvantages, it's limited in terms of the revenue potential. I mean, while it's stable, it's limited just based on the number of cars. Generally, it's disproportional impact on residential properties since they're the ones that have the bulk of the vehicles. And what I mean by it, it provides kind of a sense of fixing the problem, but often isn't. It may be inadequate financially. I mean, it's something that people are going to see. It's going to, be something, it's very transparent. It's part of the fee that they're paying. It may just give the sense that it's providing this, substantial revenue source to the city. Well, it's kind of a supplemental revenue source. If you're thinking this is going to solve your, road funding efforts exclusively, that's just not probably realistic from a financial standpoint. So, I mean, it's supplemental. It's just not. It's not your one-size-fits-all solution.
Jay?
Yeah.
I make a comment on that. I see the benefit of it, but here's Chief is here, and I have multiple complaints almost on a daily basis about unregistered cars on the street and in driveways. And you impose a wheel tax, and our residents are going to see that, and we can't do anything about the unregistered vehicles driving up and down our streets. We can't do anything about that. I think you're just going to generate a lot of anger at our residents at us. Is my thought.
But we are already paying one for Dane County, so. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like Dane County has a $28 wheel tax, and the city of Madison has a $40 wheel tax in addition. So there's actually quite a few municipalities, and some even pretty close to here, like Evansville, has a $40 wheel tax. I don't know how many vehicles there are in Fitchburg, but with 31,000 people.
10,000 cars.
The number is out on the DOT's website.
Yeah.
Greg shared the link, and I, of course, don't remember it right now.
Do people ever use wheel taxes like temporarily? Like if we're rebuilt, like for the Fish Hatchery Road reconstruction, like we're spending $35 million on the road reconstruction, we would do a wheel tax for 5 years because we're doing that big road reconstruction and then have it go down or go away?
You can. Would I say that's common? No, but I think it's just because once it gets implemented, people just leave it in place.
Just easier to-
I'm not saying that's a good reason, but I think that's just what people do.
And then is there like a certain level that it could be at any level? Like
Right.
it could be a $2 wheel tax. It could be a $40 wheel tax. It could be,
Right. It's
Yeah.
set by common council.
okay.
Question.
Although there is a maximum, I think, by statute, isn't there? As to what it can be?
I believe you're correct.
Okay.
Well, in the list of municipalities that are charging one, nobody has more than $40.
Right,
So that
correct.
may be
Maybe it's
maximum.
40.
Bill?
Why is there a cutoff on the weight of the truck? It seems like, the trucks that are heaviest do the most damage by far. Those should have the largest impact fee.
I don't know the answer to that. That's just the statutory requirement. I understand your point, but I don't know the answer.
Maybe it had a better lobby group. It's all about that.
So another item that's transportation related is what's called a transportation utility. And this is kind of a utility that is really set up, similar to other types of utilities, except the primary purpose of the revenue generated by the utility is to directly support road infrastructure and the movement of, goods and services throughout the community. So it's kind of created under the similar statutory authority for maybe what are considered more traditional types of utilities, but this provides a similar mechanism to help pay for transportation needs within the community. So how is this typically calculated, how it's administered? So, you typically set, an annual revenue target. You may be looking at, replacing other revenue sources, special assessments, reducing borrowing, and then you identify administrative costs for determining the basis of the charge. So just in terms of, your salary costs, your utility billing software, things of that nature, to implement the particular charge. And then, to kind of generate, kind of the fee, typically it is based off of kind of an average trip charge. So average weekly trip and a base charge, per account. And it's really based off of kind of trip charges based on a engineering manual that kind of identifies, the typical amount of trips for specific types of properties, depending on your ultimate land use. So it's kind of tying the charge to the type of property. So certainly properties that have more vehicular traffic in and out are typically going to pay a higher fee than a property that maybe is only having a couple of trips per day at the, beginning and end of the day. And then you implement it as part of typically your utility billing system to kind of collect the user charge. So we've seen this has kind of had a little more momentum over the past few years in terms of communities looking at this. There's been a lot of communities that have been evaluating it, but few that have, necessarily taken the steps to implement it. There were some legal challenges against transportation utilities, but recent court cases ruled in favor of the municipalities that said that they did have the legal authority to create a transportation utility district under statute. So recent court action on that was favorable of the community when it was legally challenged in terms of the statutory authority. So it's really kind of a different way of looking at funding transportational needs and tying it directly to kind of use of the transportation network as defined by the number of trips to and from a property.
Greg, would an intercity bus service be something that could be, would that fit in? Could that be applied in that case?
Impact fee.
No, you're saying?
Yeah, as far as the,
I mean, interstate bus.
I mean, it's something I think that we could look into.
Yeah.
So if this is something council is interested in pursuing, there's a lot of questions I think that we would
Yes.
have and need to make sure are addressed.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't see those changes.
So it is basically a flat fee per person, because unlike a water utility or a stormwater utility, I mean, like there's a way to like assess how much a property is using
Correct.
that utility versus transportation. That's
yeah,
much more.
you're coming up with a fixed charge that you're going to apply, but it's going to be based off of kind of trip generation. So it's going to be based on the ultimate use of the property.
Okay, so it's equalized, even though people are going to use the transportation system pretty wildly different.
It takes that into account in terms of how the system is being utilized. So certain properties that generate more vehicular traffic are going to have to pay a higher amount.
So it is calculated property by property?
Yes.
Property
property
type, yeah.
Property type.
Yeah.
It's like gas station
Gas
versus
station
big box
versus-
versus a home.
But like my townhouse neighbor would pay the same as me if
Yes.
they only use bikes and we had two cars.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right,
okay.
yeah, it's not, yes, so
That would-
it's property type.
That would be similar to the way our stormwater utility works, which is like a residential unit pays a certain amount and any single-family residential unit pays that amount. But then, you get to some place like AMC or Target or somebody who's got a big parking lot, they pay a lot more based on the size of the parking lot, or impervious surface, I guess. So I could see something like that working that way.
The other distinction is, since again, this is a lot of these, the theme is you're kind of transferring some of the funding authority from property tax to some other revenue source. So here, if you have, nonprofit entities, they are paying property taxes, they're going to contribute by paying this fee.
And so when you say property type, would a resident in the heart of the city pay a different amount than somebody in the suburbs who pays a different amount than somebody who lives out in the sticks 6 miles away?
Not necessarily.
Although I think with the stormwater utility, if you're outside the urban service area, you aren't subject to that. So it's something we would have to work out. Maybe those outside the urban service area would have a different rate because they still have roads that have to be maintained. I think it would be helpful if you could, over the next week or two, to get us some information about what are the things that we can spend transportation utility money on.
Sure.
Like, we talked about roads, the bus system was brought up. What are the types of things that are related? I mean, can we take our snow plowing budget and apply that to the transportation utility? Because that would be very helpful to know. Gabrielle.
Yeah. The one risk I would like to make sure that we're at least cognizant of is we don't want to push the envelope too much. So there was that recent court case and it did go favorably, but we don't necessarily want to be the person that, or the city that is involved in the next court case. So we want to make sure we're very clear and within the confines of it. So with all of these, I guess that would be my advice.
I mean, we can find out what that court case was about, how that municipality implemented it.
Yeah, and it was about a different issue,
Right.
that particular court case. And so I guess the risk is just always with these things that are relatively new, you don't want to be the one that's
Yeah.
creating those rules as you go, in my view. At least that's what Valerie, our city attorney, would tell us. I'll let her know that I did her.
You represented her.
Yeah, I definitely want to find out more about this. I'm not attached to any of these things, but I think it's interesting. I also just want to note with our stormwater utility, and I don't know how well utilized this program is, but there are discounts for things like if you have a rain garden or rain barrels, or, we give discounts for people that are saving water from the stormwater facilities. You could do in theory, you could do something similar for transportation. Like if you only use buses, if you register your electric bike, you could have discounts on the transportation utility accordingly. It's just something I wanted to throw out there as a note.
Now, would you be able to do this in combination? Like if we created a storm or a transportation utility, would the transportation utility be able to implement a wheel tax? Because we generally deal with utilities as enterprise funds, so they don't get property tax money. They don't get money out of the general fund. They only get the money that is collected through their specific line item on somebody's bill. So how would something like that work? Is that a doable thing, or is that?
I mean, you can do both. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to communicating what your objectives are in terms of what you're trying to pay for and the revenue you're trying to generate and how you're appropriately allocating that between a transportation utility district and the wheel tax.
Julia?
Yeah, and also we need to determine if, how difficult or how easy they are to manage those, implement, because if we don't have the capacity, in the accounting department or whatever department is, we need to look at those too. What are the easy ones that we don't have too much, we don't need to use too much resources, and when I talked about resources, it could be staffing, and other stuff. So I don't know.
I appreciate that. As the accounting department, yes. So I would say if you look at our options, this transportation utility is very administratively burdensome, but it has a lot more flexibility and a lot more opportunity than, say, the wheel tax. So it's kind of a give and take. And yes, both go to transportation, but like the wheel tax tends to shift more for residential and a transportation utility tends to shift more towards commercial. So it comes down to kind of what our goals are, as Greg said.
How easy to manage.
What I like about this conversation, though, is that, this maybe we never do this, or maybe we don't do this for 20 years, but, honestly, I'd never even heard of this concept. And so, when I am levy limits, we can only increase our debt, and we could do a referendum. Those are the two things that are in my head. And I wheel tax, you know what I mean? But it's just interesting to have this, in the back of our minds as we go forward, thinking about potential other ways aside from going to referendum. So, yeah, this is all really fascinating. So I'm excited to keep going.
I like the other one. That one.
So the final item I just want to mention is, what are called payments in lieu of taxes or pilot payments. These are essentially contractual agreements that a community enters into. The example I use is a nonprofit hospital. I have two communities I work with that have pilot agreements with Aurora facilities. The portions of their facilities are tax exempt, and so they enter into a payment in lieu of taxes to receive essentially a contractual payment to cover cost of providing services to that tax exempt property. So it's a way for them to still get some revenue source since they can't collect it through a tax exempt, levy a tax on a tax exempt property. So it's very property specific, requires agreements. It's really as much of a legal endeavor as it is a financial endeavor to get pilot payments put in place. The one thing I always comment on from a financial standpoint with a pilot payment is you want to make the pilot payments relatively generic, because if the pilot payment is specifically written to cover one of those pay for one of those covered services that are identified in the levy limit statutes, and you didn't have to reduce your levy authority based on the pilot payment, which kind of eliminates the benefit of the pilot payment. So it's just, there's a lot of legal considerations that go into pilot payments, but that's the nonprofit hospital is kind of the one I always give, because I think that's pretty much the most common.
Yeah.
Are those, do those pilots have to be voluntarily based by, in this case, the hospital would have to voluntarily agree
Yes.
to it? The municipality cannot require it, correct?
Correct.
We have a couple of these. Not anymore. We used to have a couple.
Pays us a payment in lieu of taxes that's statute required, but we don't have any with nonprofits.
Oh, I remember we had an agreement with a church, but maybe that expired. Maybe it had a time limit on it. I don't remember.
If you think of it, let me know and I will do some research. But we don't currently charge, no.
Yeah, but I think the difficulty with this is once the building is already built and once it's been used for a long time without one, the city doesn't really have a way to go and make someone pay. My understanding of getting a pilot agreement is you pretty much have to do it, you pretty much have to have it as you're doing the plat or as you're doing the land division or, whatever it is that's providing an entitlement on the land. That's when you have to make sure this is done. And since we haven't done it with any of our existing nonprofits, I think it would be very difficult to make this happen.
But can I make a comment about that?
Yeah.
But sometimes, we have moved taxable parcel to non-taxable parcel, and
Yeah.
sometimes we need to be careful because, when we are converting taxable parcels to we are removing the tax property, and then the other thing is those properties, they need our services. So this is what I have been having that conversation. I think I asked you many times about this. Why? And we have a case that here, Promega is building the Usona Institute, and it's a not-for-profit, and so there is, a lot of not-for-profit churches, you name it, but they need our services. And then when they call the fire or the police, we go, and they are not paying anything in return. So, something I think it's a question about to be fair, and I don't know. I don't understand why we cannot implement something like that. But,
Well, it's a payment in lieu of taxes is a contractual obligation. So if you don't have two parties that agree, then you're not going to have a contract. And I think that's why getting it done at this juncture with there was the was it Egeman Road where some rental units went from being taxable to being a nonprofit somehow. I don't even know how that magically happened, but that might have been a time when we could try to get an agreement for this. But I think at this point it's too late to do it because that's been 2 years. I mean, you can always ask, and if we have churches everywhere, we have a couple of medical facilities, and I don't know if they're tax exempt or not. But I don't know how you go to an existing property and say, hey, you now have to pay us for fire service or whatever.
Both of the examples I gave, they were new facilities, and
Yeah.
this was all negotiated on the front end.
well, exactly. And this is maybe something that we can do for future, I don't know.
Again, I think it's still important to stress that it's a voluntary agreement on the part of the developer or the builder of the property.
It's very unfair.
You'll get no argument from that.
So I think in terms of kind of the next steps for kind of the two halves of the content we talked about, so with the financial management plan, you'll continue as you normally do through your 2024 budget process, continue to evaluate your capital improvement plan and look at your operational costs as you normally do to guide your budgetary decisions. And then for the alternative revenue sources, I think, appreciate a lot of your feedback and candor on some of these. That was exactly why we're touching on these. A lot of these, quite candidly, we have entire decks of material to go through, particularly on the transportation utility districts. I mean, those are a topic unto itself. So we were just trying to kind of touch on that at a high level. If those are things you want to learn more about, we're prepared to, provide that if that's your preference. So with that, I don't know if Misty, you had anything further?
I just want to say I appreciate that Greg was willing to have this additional conversation with us as part of the FMP, and we really appreciate the partnership that Ellers has with us to try to navigate this interesting time that we're in.
Thank you. No, I appreciate all your time. I know every year I come to give these presentations, and I appreciate the fact that you're all attentive and asking good questions, so thank you very much.
When the city of Fitchburg contacted Ellers in 1993, that was the first year. And, I appreciated the chart you put up there earlier that showed, here's your fund balance. Well, we didn't have a fund balance in 1993 because the previous two administrations had been very irresponsible with spending. And I think we're a B something with our Moody's rating, and that was 93. They've obviously gotten a lot more strict with the way they do those upgrades these days. So I think the hiring of Ellers in 1993 and the fact that they've stayed on since then is probably the smartest decision the city has ever made. And it was your company that helped us create all those guidelines you were praising us for, which I appreciate, but, it was because of Ellers. It was because of Ellers and because we had a commitment to doing those things. So I appreciate the work that you've done, that Mike Harrigan did for us for many, many years. And we've gotten to this place now where the financial management has been good, but we have some real big challenges coming up very soon, and so I appreciate all that input. The reason that I asked for this discussion of alternative revenue sources to be put on the agenda is because we're running into a real crunch time. I don't see how we're going to be able to add staffing in 2025. And we're at a point now where I'm sure all of you have had a meeting with the fire department talking about the issues that are going on there, where we have continued lack of paid-on-call people to cover the shifts, and there are some people who are working multiple shifts. We have firefighters who are working overtime to cover shifts just because we don't have the bodies. So we need to add bodies, and adding those bodies, just that piece of what we need to add, is going to be a little over $700,000. We also need to add someone in HR. I haven't talked to the assessing department, but we probably need to add someone in assessing, and we probably will definitely need to do that with the addition of Town of Madison. So we have a lot of needs that are coming up that we just simply don't have the levy limit to fulfill. And as we're starting to see 2023 and 2024 are probably going to have slower growth in the tax base than what we had anticipated. And so this problem is getting worse. So whatever we decide to do, we need to decide pretty quickly. If we're going to have a referendum, that referendum probably needs to be at the September primary of next year so that Misty can have it to be prepared for assembling the budget for 2025. And that doesn't give us a lot of time right now. We're probably going to need to hire a consultant to come in and help us put the referendum materials together to do the part of the educational process. We have other commitments from other organizations that will be willing to help us get the word out. But these are things that we simply have to do, and we've reached a point where we cannot put this off anymore. So I hope that we can come to some decisions about how we want to move ahead in the next couple of months. Now, July, we're going to have more discussion about this at the July Committee of the Whole meeting, but we aren't going to have any council meetings. So if you have, or until, the night before the committee of the whole meeting. So if you're wanting more information than what was presented tonight, please, please, please send it to Misty so that we can have the answers to your questions available at that meeting, because this is really important and we're really running out of time. Joe?
Can you go back to the piece about referendum? A little further. It was the initial one when you started talking about referendum. It was sort of the rules behind it.
No, this was the slide I had.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so I mean, staffing is what I keep hearing. I did meet with the fire department staff. It sounds like the amount of money we're hemorrhaging in overtime is enough to be able to cover a position, possibly two, from my understanding of their graph. So I agree with you. I mean, I'll just put my thoughts up front, and obviously need to learn more, but given that our city is primarily run by, personnel, most of our expenses are people, and that's an ongoing expense. I think if we do go to referendum, it should be broad across the entire, staffing of the city. It shouldn't be just relegated to one specific sector. Just given the things that, Jay even mentioned right now, it should be holistic. It shouldn't be we're doing it to pay for this. Just because I think it would allow us the flexibility to determine what needs there are in terms of staff, and then have the independence to be able to make those decisions. So that would be my personal view of it as, as a council that we should look at.
Julie?
So I don't know, you have read in the news, but also the Madison School District is planning to do a referendum next year. So, so we have to be very strategic if we are going to go that route, because we don't know. We need to have, consent from the council. So we need to think about that. If the Madison School District is going to a referendum, they're going to be part in our city that people are going to vote for two referendum. You know what I mean? So, we had to be careful about that, So I think what I mentioned in my CIP letter, I know you read it, is, what you said is in the letter. Also, I mentioned some of the constraint that we are going to have in the future budget is that, yes, we need to determine what we are going to do. Is we are going to go through a referendum or what is plan B? If we are not doing that because council doesn't feel comfortable to go in that route, we need to determine what the other alternative that they were presented today we can go. So I think we need to have in mind, because we need to make a decision, and I agree, we have to do it. We need to have something ready and approved by next year, because 2025 is going to be a very difficult budget to close. And then because the city is growing, we are not going to have the ability to, to keep with the growth, staffing, and, so I know it's painful, I know that knowing what this is it's a difficult conversation, but we need to think about, we are here to make policies that for the next 10 years or 20 years of the city. We are here, all of us, to make difficult decisions, okay? And we are here to think about the sustainability, the financial sustainability of this city in the next 10 years. This is what is there. This is how we need to approach this, you know what I mean? Otherwise, we need to go to the board and start cutting services. And I don't think any one of you want to do that. So we need to think very careful what we want to do as a city. We want to continue with the momentum of the growth. We want to continue to be a vibrant community, provide the excellent service that we provide to our residents. But yeah, it's a very difficult decision that we are going to make together. But we need to determine how you feel comfortable in your own skin, So because we need to provide guidance to Chad, to Misty, and to our financial consultants where we are going to go. Because this project takes time. You know, we need to explain the why to the community. We need to educate them. And it's you know, I remember when the Madison School District did a referendum for, what it was, 2-3 years ago? I don't remember, for the school. You know, and they did a very good job explaining the why and what is important and why we need to do that, what is, you know, what are the risks of if we're not doing this, you know, so. Verona did that too, you know, so I know it's a very difficult decision. Some of you are, you know, maybe more open than other ones to talk about that, but I think we need to know I would like to know, you know, how do you feel about this? First of all, do you feel that, yes, we need to do something to move forward? We need to look at another source of revenue? First of all, I need to know that. We need to know that. And then we can decide which are the best option to move forward. I don't know. He's managing the meeting.
Joe?
Most of the other revenue options presented seem very limiting. That's the sense that I get. Like, you know, a $40 wheel tax on, I'm just estimating, like 10,000 cars. That's not a lot of money. And it seems like the amount that we need if we want to, you know, keep up with the growth of the city in terms of our staff would be a lot more than that. I'm not saying I'm in favor of this yet. I still haven't decided, but if the needs are as great as we're saying they are, there seem to be limited amount of ways to be able to meet those massive needs.
Well, I think the, as I've just done some little back of the napkin calculations, which has no official bearing on any of this discussion, I think we need to probably raise the property tax levy somewhere between $1 million and $1.2 million. And we won't be able to do that under the current levy limits. We won't be anywhere close. So, and a wheel tax, maybe that gets us $400,000. Well, $400,000 is a chunk of that, but none of these things are going to do it completely. And I don't know what our current road maintenance budget is. I don't even know if the transportation, I mean, theoretically, maybe we could make up the money in a transportation utility and just move all the transportation costs out of the operating budget and put them into the transportation utility. But we need more information about that, like what exactly can we pay for through a transportation utility? I don't know. And we don't have a complete answer to that tonight, which is fine. I mean, you know, there's no sense in spending a lot of time on it till you know, you know. And you know, this streetlight user charge. Well, that's a you know, maybe that works in a smaller municipality like Oregon where they don't have all of the, well, frankly, growth is expensive, and Fitchburg has been on this unrelenting growth pattern, which is fine, but growth is expensive, and to keep paying for it, and so a lot of what we're doing is playing catch-up now. We just added 2 new fire stations that we're paying for through debt, and one of those fire stations we shouldn't have had to build, but we had to because of a bad decision that was made in 1993. So part of what we have to do is start making smarter decisions about how we do these things, and start thinking more long term. Now, I think the 2 new fire stations we have a lot of those features in them. But you know, I have some things. There are a number of things about them that are very disappointing to me. But, you know, I wasn't here to make those decisions, so that's how it goes. But, you know, as we are looking at staffing issues, and, I mean, I don't want to be on the front page of the State Journal because we couldn't put out fires because we don't have fire staffing. There were times when that happened back shortly after we incorporated. There were times, there are 3 buildings that are at the fairways that don't exist anymore because they burned to the ground because, the town of Fitchburg and the early city of Fitchburg didn't have the capacity to put those fires out. Plus, the buildings didn't have sprinklers, plus. I mean, there's a lot of things, but we haven't had, since we've had our increased fire staffing, we haven't had buildings burned to the ground like that in the city. So this is one of the things that residents expect of us. And I think, Joe, if we're going to do a referendum, we need to be specific in the referendum about what we're going to pay for, because that's how you get the resident buy-in. If you just say to the residents, we want to increase your taxes by $1.2 million, some people may go along with that, but a lot of people are going to say, wait a minute, you're already spending over $20 million. What are you going to do with the rest of this money? So I think rather than taking a general approach, we have to be very specific about it. I think that's what's called for in this kind of a thing. But, these are more decisions that we'll have to make. Gabriella? Yeah.
I don't know if we still need Ellers here for any of these conversations. I just want to be cognizant of their time that they've been spending. So we can certainly continue the conversation, but I just want to at least check in with the council if you see a need for Ellers to remain.
I think Dave was first. I think Dave is there.
Oh, Dave?
I was just say, well, Jay, I'm sorry I disappointed you on the fire station. I was on the committee, you approved a lot of stuff. I'm just kidding a little bit on that. I think I think when I say this will not come as a surprise to any of you knowing me that I won't be in favor of going to resolution. But if it ends up that way, Joe, I think I agree with Jay that it should be specific. I think you have a better chance of it passing. There's no guarantee if it passed. But what I would come back to, like for instance on the firefighters. Well, we can't get the volunteers. I think it's a lot cheaper for us to figure out why and what it would take to get more paid on time. We have a huge resource of young, in my district, Hispanic men and women that probably would like to contribute to their community. I don't know if we've got the message to them. I met one the other day. And he works as a barber during the day, and I said, I think we could use you. You want it? And he said, well, I'll consider it. I think it would cost us far less to find a way to get, more paid on time volunteers. And even if we had to double what we're paying them, I think we should look at the option that's going to cost us the least. So that's all I'm going to say.
Gabriella?
I definitely want to look into referendum. I think it's looking, when we look at the budget process, Misty puts together all those great graphs, and like 70% of our cost is staff. And ultimately, all these other solutions, they're great for capital expenditures. They're great for reducing debt. And so they have a use, and maybe they kick the can down the road a little farther. But ultimately, we have to hire staff, and in order to do that, you have to have consistent annual funding, and the referendum is the best way to do that. I hope that the shared revenue. My understanding is that the shared revenue gives us a little more flexibility. It gives us a little bit more runway before we have to make this decision. Like, we don't need to do a referendum this year, where pre-shared revenue final number, I think that was maybe looking like a possibility, or something that either that or cut services. So we have a little bit of time, but we don't have that much time, right? We're looking at this maybe 2024, 2025. But so yeah, I definitely want to look at it. I agree that, I think the specificity note is well taken, but it doesn't have to be, it can be for other parts of the city besides public safety. I think that you see public safety a lot.
Sure.
We can look at other aspects. We can be specific without it being exclusive to one area that is typically done for referendum, I think. So, yes, and I think that's what Joe was trying to say. Yeah. So I think we definitely need to look into it. I do think that we should look at some of these other options too. In particular, the impact fee, especially since the fire station impact fees are going away. I see no reason why we should just wipe that clean when we have a big police station that's going to be built next year. And that's obviously being built because the city is growing. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it might make sense for like transportation infrastructure as well. And I think I'm open to some of the other ones as well. But like I said, staffing needs operating money, which requires that consistency that you can't get from those other ones. So yes, referendum is something I want to consider.
Well, I think and I'm not opposed to impact fees. I just think the problem with an impact fee, as they said earlier, is that you can only use it for the capital expenditure. So you can't use it for staffing. And then somebody's got to figure out, we already have existing staffing in the police department. And so the cost to accommodate that existing staffing can't be subject to the impact fee. So it would only be the incremental cost that we're building based on the planned growth, which, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's more than that. I don't know. But, on a $30 million building, the $3 million, it's something, but it's not earth-shattering.
It reduces the debt burden, which is
a little bit, yeah. But so I think we can look at that. But if we're going to do that, we need to do that pretty soon, because, yeah.
The other thing if we're talking about the police station that is going to be a building, $35 million building, we need to also, how much is going to cost to maintain that building, So that one is going to hit the operating budget. So, it's in this, you look at the CIP, there are some rough number there, how much it's going to cost, and the replacement fund, you know what I mean? So I think, yes, we are building this, we need to have the police station, we are building, but also it's going to be not the cost associated to maintain the staffing, in the police department, but also to maintain that facility is going to be huge. And the other thing is, we are, if you look how many parks we have, built in the last couple of my 8 years here at council, I don't know, we are building one every year or two. And we look at the parks department staffing is having stagnant, you know what I mean? So also we need to make the decision when we approve all this new park, we need to determine, do we have the resources, the staffing to maintain all of that? And this is what I said, I agree, if we're going to a referendum, it had to be like, we had to include and look at, first of all, the study that is going to come from Baker Tilly. They're going to give us an idea how our staffing is going to look and the projection for future years. And then also incorporate every department in the city. If we're going to do it, and it's going to be a very robust and intense process, we need to do it right, and we need to say, okay, we are going to include it has to be fair for all the departments. That's it.
Bill?
Yeah, just going back to your back of the envelope calculations, it made me think this referendum probably should not spark a huge amount of outrage, given that we learned earlier this year that the average family pays just over $200 a month for the city services, and our budget is roughly $30 million a year. So just knock a zero off, and you're paying $20 a month for every $3 million of budget. If you're talking, we need less than half that, we're asking for an additional $10 a month. So I don't think that's going to.
No, I think there's a way to sell it. I just think it's, we have to do those calculations and we have to present it that way. But in order to do those calculations, we got to figure out what we're going to fund first. And that's, because I wouldn't feel comfortable going and saying, you know what, you guys all need to pay another $10 a month. That would be, I would be like, well, I may be happy to give you $10 a month, but what are you going to do with it? So, these are questions that we need to hash through. And, frankly, if we're going to do the referendum, we need to get most of this heavy lifting done by the end of the year, I think, because if we're going to hire a consultant who's going to do some of the publicity work and help us structure this and come up with the right wording and all that stuff, we probably need to hire that person maybe in January if we're gonna be shooting for a September referendum, although
Sooner.
Miss-
Much sooner.
Misty's making a face at, well, maybe we need to do that by September, October. I don't know. I mean, when we did the library referendum, we didn't hire an outside consultant. That was done by the library board. And they raised all kinds of money and spent a lot of money sending mailings out to people. And those referenda, there were 2 referenda, one for the building construction and one for the operating budget, and both of those passed. So I think the residents of Fitchburg are willing to spend money on things, but they need to know what it is they're spending money on.
So it sounds like we should gather some additional information on referendum, and we can talk about that as we have tentatively planned at the July Committee of the Whole. Other things that we've heard is transportation utility, at least getting more information. I don't know if there's necessarily appetite, but at least an understanding of what those costs could be, or the fees collected through that, the utility could be utilized for. So I think that's just maybe just an informational item. And are there any other items that you'd like us to get more information on?
In order to, if we need to put together a resolution for a referendum, suppose, okay, so do we need the majority of the council to approve, or we need 2/3? What, do you know what is?
So the library referendum was not binding, but that we put that referendum on the ballot with the majority of the council.
With the majority, okay.
This referendum is binding, so if this fails, then we are up a creek. So, but I don't know, my suspicion is the same rules apply, that the council can put it on the ballot with a majority. Is that correct?
We can collect more information
Okay,
for the July.
so all of that, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
What, how is the process,
Yeah, yep, we'll look at that.
I'm interested in impact fees as well.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I agree.
Impact to you,
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, with that, thank you for coming and doing all of that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You've provided enormous amounts of information that, of course, will take us the next year to digest, so. All right, and the other thing I wanted to talk about tonight is the civic campus concept, which is this thing that's been kind of an unwritten thing that's floating around here. The council's never voted on a civic campus, but it seems to be driving so many decisions that we make. And the civic campus idea started when the community center was built next door in 1988. The land that we are sitting on was donated to the city by Bill Linton's Promega Corporation. So the city owns the land, kind of, although Bill Linton still has considerable control over the architecture of anything that gets built here. So that's one of the reasons this city hall ended up costing as much as it did, was because the restrictions that were put in place when this building was built added significantly to the cost of building this building. Now, as will come as no surprise to any of you, I opposed building this building here. Previous to this location, we had been working, the city council had been meeting in the community center, because we had previously been meeting in a room in the old city hall, which is now demolished, and that building continued to stand. When did that finally get demolished, Dave?
15 years ago, at least.
No, it couldn't have been that long ago, because it was still here when I left office as mayor. I tried to get that demolished for years because that building was leaking, and we still had staff working in that building. So then this building got built in 1990, well, it got completed in 1999. And that's when everybody moved in here. And the reason it was built here was because, well, we have the land for free. But just because we have the land for free doesn't make it a good financial decision. And then in 2011, we built the library next door. And we have spent a lot of time on this council talking about the fact that residents who may want to use the library have no access to it because the transit is so poor. And this was something I argued about at the time that the library was built. So I am becoming frustrated beyond my ability to contain it that we keep building buildings, we keep putting these massive investments in this location. This building that we're sitting in right now was a $6.5 million building at the time we built it. The library was a $10.5 million building at the time we built it. And now we're talking about a $30 or $35 million building that we want to put in the same place, which makes no sense because this is a bad location for many residents of the city. And yes, we have a free piece of land, but that doesn't offset what it's going to cost to provide certain services to the rest of the residents. So I don't know what the right location is, but I'm certain that the one next door is wrong. And I learned long ago that you don't necessarily have to know the right answer to a problem in order to know that a particular answer is wrong. So I think we need to, I don't want to restart the entire police station discussion, but I do want to examine other places in the city where we could build a building that would serve more needs. I know Jim has comments, and I'm going to get to you in just a second. One of the things that since we don't build that many buildings, one of the things we could do is create spaces in it. And I know there was already some discussion about putting a meeting room in it, but we already have 4 buildings here, or 3 buildings here that have meeting rooms in them. So if we could put those types of facilities, if we could put a meeting room in another part of the city that would be able to accommodate needs like the library's needs to provide services in other parts of the city, or the senior center. The senior center is really struggling right now because they don't have the transportation capacity to get elderly people, especially in Dave's neighborhood or in other parts of the city. They have people that they can't provide services to that might like to come to the services that the senior center is providing, but it's not anywhere near a transportation corridor. And so why we are so headstrong and so committed to doing this location as the spot is beyond me. I know there was some discussion that happened, 8 or 9 or 10 years ago. That was pre-pandemic. That was, there were so many things that have happened in the city since then. I just don't think it makes any sense to do this. I would prefer, if we're going to do this, to maybe look somewhere in the Verona Road corridor. There's plenty of pieces of land that could be used for something like this in that area, but I don't know. I don't know the specifics of where it should go. I just know that this isn't the place. So, Jim?
Yeah, I just want to, should we invite the chief up and actually to give some input into this? Because there's some specific things about a police station that, I get what you're saying, Jake, don't get me wrong. I get what you're saying. But when you're looking at a police station, it's totally different on where you're going to place it. I mean, you have our immigrant community that you have to look at. You have our African-American community who distrust the police. You have the optics of, you're talking about a $35 million building, and then, you said it should be somewhere else where it could serve people better, but that shouldn't be a police station because the optics of that, of putting it into a challenged neighborhood, is not good. You want people to actually come to your police station. And I can tell you from experience, because I ran the South District for 3 years, that you're going to have people who are not going to want to come to the police station. So I get what you're saying, but I just think we got to look at this as something different than the police, with a police station. I would like the chief to actually give some input.
And we can talk to the chief in a minute if that's necessary. But to your point, there is no other municipality in Dane County, and probably in most of the rest of the state, although I haven't really investigated the rest of the state. But there is no other municipality in Dane County that feels the need to group all of its big buildings in a place that is not where the residents are. And even when you look at Madison, you know, the police stations aren't stuck out in the middle of nowhere. But Madison operates differently because it's got different districts. But they don't take a police station and stick it out where nobody is. There are also some things about visibility, about having a police station that makes people think that it's a safe community. But sticking it out here doesn't make any sense to me. Julia.
I think I understand that you disagree completely the location, but also you need to, understand the other people's position. And I will say that, I agree with Jim, some of the comment that he made about the location. And also the police, I believe that the police should be where the people is doing the services, okay? But I don't think why people are gonna come to the police station to do what services there. So why is gonna come people, I don't think people coming to the police station here to do any, I don't know, we don't do any admin work, we don't issue any, I don't know, So my question is, this is what I don't feel that this location here, I think this is for me is the proper location because it's in the civic campus, and because I don't think that people are coming to the police station to do what services. I imagine that our officers are on the neighborhood in the car or walking, or this is what they should be doing. But I want to understand, because you tell me, I agree with you, the library is a very bad location, it was very bad planning, all of that. I agree with you and 100% sure. But also we are building the hub in the Northfish Hatchery Room where there's gonna be room for the senior center to do some activity, for the community police officer being there, for the library to do some programming. So we are building something there, a big shelter there, that where we have rooms for to do activities. I don't feel comfortable to have a police station. We have to be strategically where we put it, and I agree with the comment that Jim made about this. The optics is, we have a huge immigrant community here that we have to be very, respectful of what are the perception about policing and all of that. So that's it. This is my comment.
Joe?
Yeah, sorry. 100% agree with Jim and Julia. I mean, this is a big cost, and I've brought it up before, and I know it's not doable in the near future, but ultimately the problem is that our civic campus is not accessible by bus.
Right.
And a half a mile from here to McKee, I mean, that is the ultimate solution. We need bus to just come a little bit further so that it gets here so people can take the bus from different places in the city to go to the library, to go to City Hall to get their permits, to go to the senior center. I mean, that would be the ideal solution to the inaccessibility of our civic campus by bus. And I know it's $400K a year or less. I heard an estimate. I may be way off on that, but
Well,
200. Yeah, just to bring it down. I mean, even if it comes down twice a day, there needs to be some public accessibility to this series of buildings that we have. And
I'm more concerned about the broader concept of the civic campus. This is something that is invented, and it was never discussed among the council. It was just something that was done. And I keep hearing it repeated as if it means something, as if it has any weight. And the bottom line is, there is no, as I pointed out earlier, no municipalities do a civic campus. This is something that we invented here. And to me, I think it does a great disservice to the community. One of the things that I'm that I really struggle with when we build these expensive buildings. This is supposedly an investment in the community. When you build expensive buildings in places, even if it's the city, it tells people that it's a strong community, that it's a good community. But when you group all of those buildings in a place where nothing else is going to happen, there's a $35 million investment here isn't going to increase the amount of investment anybody else puts in the city of Fitchburg. Just like the $10 million library that we built did nothing, absolutely nothing, to increase the amount of investment that anybody else would put in this neighborhood. Because the neighborhood was largely built out by the time it was built. So I think if we put $35 million into another part of the city, it would attract other investors who would say, hey, this is a place where we can do this. This idea that we have to build every city building in this location, other than the fire stations, because we have response times to deal with, or, wells, because we have to deal with, water service, and we have to get a plumbing system that works. The notion that we need to build every city building in this location makes no sense. It has not made sense since we started doing it 30 years ago, and the amount of sense it currently makes is going down by the day. Gabriella.
Jay, I think you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I 100% agree. I think we all agree. I think the Civic Campus is ridiculous. I actually don't, I think it was the other way around. I think the Civic Campus idea came about as a description of what existed already. It was just a term that you could, instead of having to say, oh, the City Hall and the Senior Center and the Community Center and the library, we just say the Civic Campus is just like a shorthand. That's my idea of it. I don't think it's a concept that we're like, oh, we can only build city buildings in this one area. I think it was just a shorthand that came about basically when we put together the wayfinding signs a couple years ago.
Well, I can tell you that word was used right after the decision to build this building here.
Okay, well,
that's when that phrase was invented.
Fair enough. I mean, maybe that existed before, but like the other thing, and I'm going to echo a lot of what's already been said, but like the police station is the one building that I think should be collectively with the other ones. It should be the one that's right next to City Hall because of the nature of the facility and what it means in the community. If we were building a community center, if we were building the senior center, if we were building another library or the library, 100% it should have been elsewhere. And I think the whole council would be like, yep, definitely should have had a facility elsewhere. So, I mean, it's sort of like, I agree with you 100%. Everything that you're saying is true, but it's kind of already a done deal. Like, we already built our library, we already built our community center, we already built our senior center. So, like, we either build other city facilities that can be utilized in that way, meaning like a smaller community center, a teen center, a library auxiliary building. I don't know what it would be, or a park shelter with some more indoor space. I don't know what it would be. We could build those spaces that can be used in other parts of the city. I think at that point, that's our main option in terms of infrastructure. Then the other option that we really need is the transportation. We need to make sure the transportation works better in the city to get people here that want to come here. So there's those two elements, where we can build some things elsewhere, and then we can also bring people to this campus. But, your point is good. Everything you're saying is true. The frustration, I 100% agree with. I just feel like the police station is the one building that I would never agree to put elsewhere. And I for better or worse, it is what it is. And so I just wanted to explain that. I agree with you, but I just don't think that in this particular case, in this particular building, there's anything that we should do differently. That being said, I think we can have a conversation about what kind of spaces that we create elsewhere that can be used in those community-centered ways. What can we do to improve the transportation system in a piecemeal way to get people to the services that exist in this area? Those are the two parts of the conversation that I think are very important. I think the police station, for better or worse, the location is a done deal in my mind. And that may be upsetting, but that, for me, that's where I am.
Well, $35 million is a lot of money. And in fact, it's more money than we spent on all of these buildings combined. It's pretty much twice as much as we spent on all of these buildings combined. And my thought on this is that if we're going to build a $35 million building, we ought to be able to include other spaces in it. We ought to be able to include spaces in it that could be used by the senior center or by the library or by whoever else. And I don't think that you necessarily have to have a building that looks like a police station on every side. I mean, you could have a police station entrance, but you could also have a community center entrance. And I think to me, this is part of the problem in how we think about things generally, is we often revert to township mentality, and we think that we have buildings that can only be used for one thing. And I think we need to expand that. I mean, at the new fire stations we have additional meeting rooms in there. And there's no reason why that can't be done in a police station. And I understand that there may be some populations in the city that are very, that have a lot of trepidation about police and about police stations. I get that. I totally get it. But that doesn't mean that we have exhausted our options as to what other places there can be. And, maybe Gabriella is right, and maybe Gabriella has the thinking of the majority of the council that this location is the only place in a city of 35 square miles where we can put a police station. I don't think that's true. I think there are ways that if we're going to put this kind of investment in the community, we can do it in a way that it has a longer-term benefit for the community than just simply a police station. Jim?
I agree. I think, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I still say, Jay, I agree with you with what you're saying, but you got to look at the function of a police station. We're going to have domestic violence victims coming in this place who may not want to walk into a police station. We're going to have confidential informants. So the idea that we're going to have all these services come into a police station is just not, I don't think that's practical. And you may be spending more money because police stations have a lot of stuff in it, like AR-15 rifles. They have weapons, they have tasers, they have evidence. You may be paying more, actually, to secure all that stuff. So, I'm just saying that. Police stations, we got to look at a police station different and not have this, kind of thing that, well, we could just have a police station with all kinds of services. Because even when we had looked at, well, maybe have public safety buildings with police and fire and just have police and fire together. There are a lot of things why you would not do that because of the operations of a police station. And when we're having, if a police station, you start to have operations, you start to have things that are coming in, you really don't want this to be the focus of community services also. So, you got to look at the police station differently, and I would just say we should probably just wait till some of the things that are coming in when we are in the planning stages. And I think it'll be a lot more information of what actually goes into the police station. That's why I wanted to actually have the chief make a few comments if that's possible.
Yeah, Dave?
Jay, my friend, I think you're going to be on the losing side of this one.
Do you really?
What I would say, you might think I'm a closed-minded knuckle dragger, but I think this was a great, we got free land. We got free land to build our facilities. You say, no other cities have a campus or something. That's because none of them had free land that was given to them to put the place in. I keep coming back. I don't know who goes to City Hall. None of my neighbors come to City Hall. The senior center is a different story in the library, but they come here and they vote, or they hate to come here and they got to pay their taxes. That's not a place. You want to go to a grocery store. They want to go. I think it's a good location because we got the free land and there is efficiencies of having our buildings together. I feel there's administrative and other things. So that's all I'm going to say on it.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dave. I think there can be some efficiencies, but we also live in a world where all these buildings are going to be interconnected electronically. And so those types of efficiencies that might have made a difference many years ago don't have the same impact anymore. you touched on something, Jim, that I think is important that we should talk about, and that was, maybe you'll have victims of domestic violence, maybe you'll have confidential informants. How are they going to get here? Well, that's great. That's great, but I mean, the thing is, we continue to build things in places where they aren't accessible to people, and that's what is really driving me nuts.
I get it.
Because it makes no sense. It makes no logical sense. Now we had where was I going with that thought? Anyhow, Joe, go ahead.
Just like slight disagreement with Dave and the way City Hall is used. Want to point to the fact that City Hall is used for council meetings, and we want the public to be engaged and come to council meetings. And right now, it's limited to people who can either get a ride here or have a car. So, just thinking of that Southdale bus conversation where we had 40 people here, right? It was probably a really big lift to get those 40 people here. And having a city hall in a place that's on public transportation would be necessary in order for people to regularly come here and express despite our technology that we have. I mean, there's just something special about when you have an issue and people can actually come here and show their support or opposition to an issue.
Yes, please.
Before I forget. So what we need to think, I think we need to reverse our conversation, because the civic campus, or whatever you want to call it, the civic campus is here. We are not gonna move the senior center, the library of this building. So what we need to think about is how we're gonna make people to come to this building. So this is what we need to, because we are not moving this. We are not moving the senior center because we don't have the resources to build another senior center, because we already are here. So the idea is, what are the things that we can do as a council, to bring the people here? And we know transit is one, so we need to start maybe working on how to make transit to come to this part of the city. The city in the future, 10 or 20 years, is going to grow south too, okay? So we need to think about where we are going to grow to. So I think in maybe in 20 years, this is going to be the center of the city, okay?
No, it's not.
Well, okay, Jay, I know that you need to respect other people's opinion too, okay? So I know that right now, if we ask everyone here, how do they feel about this location? Because we need to move forward with the police station, because we are running out of time, you know what I mean? So we need to decide it. I will say that the majority of the people sitting here, they agree that this is the location for the police station. I know
That may be.
But I understand your point of view. I know. This is why the future buildings, the community center or other the teen center, hub, whatever you want to name it, this is what we need to have this discussion about. We are going to build those places in the correct place where the community can enjoy, the community have access, there is, you know what I mean? So I think when we built the library, I think the group of people that built the library didn't see with an equity lens. They didn't see they were connected to the rest of the city. But you know what? It's here. We are not going to move this building other place. So what we need to know is what are the things that we can do with the resources that we have to make people come to this part, okay? That's it. I understand your frustration because I agree with you and, some of the stuff you said about the bad planning when we built the library and the senior center. I agree with you 100%, but I think I would prefer the police station now to be located here for many, many reasons.
I can't think of any except Dave's free land. But I just want to throw this out there again. There's two things. First of all, if you read the comprehensive plan, you would know that we are not going to be building anything south of the power line for probably ever. And that's because that power line is on the top of a ridge, and we don't have any way to do gravity sewer on the south side of that ridge. So if you and I live to be 100 years old, if we live to be 150 years old, there will not be development there because that's part of.
I was speaking figurative. There are, we are growing southwest and southeast and southwest. You know what I mean? So the growth is going to come to the southeast and west. You know what I mean? And we are in the center.
Well, right now the growth is happening on the eastern side of the city. So, but the other point that I was trying to get out there, which maybe it doesn't matter. But I think when the city is building big, expensive buildings, that makes a statement. It says that we are building big, expensive buildings. And building big, expensive buildings in places where nobody goes doesn't make any sense to me. We should be putting those investments in neighborhoods that need the help. And I know, Dave, free land. I totally get free land. But, even if we, and I mentioned this to you the other day, even if we have to spend $1 million to buy a piece of land over the 50-year life of a police station, I presume we're building this to at least a 50-year life, that's $20,000 a year. And when compared to the $35 million cost, it's nothing. So I think if we're going to be, I still believe that if we're going to be doing these things and making these kinds of investments in the city, and I hope nobody misunderstands this. I am not opposed to building, I'm not even opposed to building a $35 million police station. I think that's a great thing for the community, and I think it will help our police department, and I think it will have a lot of benefits moving forward. I just think this is the worst possible location it could go. And I've laid those reasons out already, so I will put an end to that. Does anyone else wish to pound on me?
We here all night.
I don't know that there's any more discussion we need to have.
I would like to talk if I get the opportunity.
Please.
Can I?
Sure, why not?
I'm glad this is being recorded, by the way, because there's a lot of interesting topics that everybody brings up, and I think putting it all together, they all are relevant. And I think it's a debate, but even those pieces, I'm glad I recorded it, because you can pull pieces from everybody, and you can put something together that's pretty great. And we're just seeing things differently. But I want to start off by saying this, is Fitchburg growing or not? And we keep hearing it's growing, but then when it comes to things, transportation, I think as it's growing, the transportation is going to come. And people are going to be able to get here. The camp, whatever you want to call it, campus, downtown, whatever, let's look at data, let's look at history, let's look at how cities have grown, metropolises have grown, and kind of look at those cities and what we can do to make our city better. If you look at overlays, the overlay maps of your metropolitan Chicago area, now it's grown to the suburbs, how Milwaukee has grown to the suburbs, how Madison eventually is going to grow to the suburbs. How do you plan for that? And you have to look at those things to see, how do we plan accordingly? How did you come from a downtown or a headquarters or an area of City Hall for services to now substations, districts, or precincts? How did you get to that? And it comes from growth, and then strategically putting those extra spots where they need to be as the city grows. But you still have to have a base. And that's how many of these cities have been created, through a base, a downtown, per se, not necessarily a City Hall campus, but a downtown. Many city services intertwine, which is why you need to have an area for a one-stop shop. If you have a person applying for a tavern license, they need to be fingerprinted and background. Some things, as we're moving into the future, many things can be done online. I don't want to say that I'm an old person. I'm in my 50s, but I still want to do things in person, and I don't really like to use these things. First of all, because I can't see. So I need to come in person. And we have those services. We do have department meetings. We are in an area in 21st century, when we look at problems in the city, we look at a problem-oriented approach. Does the police need to get involved, or is it a DPW matter? Or is it our inspections that can do something? Or how do we help our assessors out in a piece? Or what about fire? And these meetings go on about the problems in the city. So I wasn't the decision maker for that area. I have no problem with that area. But when we talk about putting something, and we have to be very careful because things are being recorded and things can be misinterpreted here. And I'll bring up, living with 30 years of law enforcement experience, how things can be misinterpreted when you're dealing with ACLU. And what I mean by that is Cops on Dots strategy. If we want to look at data and put over police neighborhoods based on economics, based on education, based on those pieces, it brings more of a separation between police and community. You want to address those areas using data, technology, and intelligence that you get. You don't necessarily have to be in their face to get that, nor do communities want you to be in their face. You can create an area. I agree with the way it's set up now. It can be very productive. You brought up some great points, which is space. Meeting space in City Hall is packed, and we're fighting for the same, different departments are fighting for the same space to have meetings. And there's no reason why, if you have an extra meeting space across the street, that we can't continue some of these problem-oriented approaches to have meetings there and bring community there. I'm confident that with the minds here and with City Hall leadership, that we will get transportation where it's needed to bring it here. But be very careful when we talk about where we want to put a station and what those needs are. Because the town of Madison, and even amongst our staff, and many of them who left, were so worried about taking on a piece of the town of Madison. We own the town, part of the town of Madison, and I haven't seen the sky fall yet. Yes, there's some economically challenged people there, education challenge, but they're not criminals. Now we have to continue and work with that area to be more community-centric. Because for law enforcement, part of why people have left since 2020, it's not necessarily, I'm going to buy you a new squad, I'm going to buy you new vests or new Motorola radios. It's about the attention here and how we view ourselves on that TV screen when everybody's watching there. Like technology, we don't have to be in these rooms to see what the thought is when it comes to talking about police. Actions speak louder than words. We have to be very careful how we do that because everybody plays a role in what's going on in law enforcement in our nation. Just came from an NAACP meeting on recruiting and retention. It's a much bigger picture than everybody thinks, a much bigger problem than everyone thinks. And everybody here, if we're serving the city of Fitchburg, we have to take that into consideration. So I wanted to bring on some points, some spots. I don't want to overtalk the position about when you have a police station, that's in a neighborhood, that's challenge. You may be able to, being there may push some of the problem out, but you can't really conduct business because everybody will be watching the building, and it puts fear into people who do want to cooperate with the police or do want to give a complaint. But you do want to have it in an area where people know where it's at. Currently, we've even had PFC commissioners not know where the police station is. And frankly, in my opinion, the police station here was an afterthought in putting it in the basement. We had a wonderful event today. We partnered up with the City of Madison, the State Department of Police, State Patrol, in working with child seats. This is the second year that I've been a part of that. Many people come. If you were there, you would have seen the people coming and going to get educated on the child seat program. I would love to have that in a police station that is a police station, not a fire station, not at a church, but that relationship with people, bringing those services, and having an open house like that is huge for a time that we want to build relations between police and community. Frankly, I haven't seen Fitchburg PD have a home. I've only been here less than 2 years to see that they have no home. So think about that for a while, when you make your decisions, or maybe how you bring this position up. A police station also is, if you built it right, it's a skeleton that can last for more than 50 years. If you go to cities like Milwaukee, Chicago, New York, some of these precincts are coming up on 100 years, and if I probably went to New York, some of those buildings are probably over 100 years old. But they have the skeleton of a police station that can be remodeled and updated. I'm used to calling the garage a barn, because that's where the horses would come in with an arrest, or with whatever needs police back in those days needed. They just turned into parking, indoor parking. You have a jail. You have an area for command that's separate from an aerial patrol, and you can have confidential meetings without your police officer hearing what the chief of police is saying. You need evidence. If there is if you cannot properly document chain of custody and evidence, you lose cases in court. You're wearing a mask, Alder Jetzer. What kind of evidence do you think we're packaging up sometimes? Drugs that we don't even know what kind of drugs they are. You have to have a facility, an area where you can do that and even decontaminate if it spills onto yourself. A police station is different than office space. This topic of discussion that I'm aware of has been in City Hall since 2014. So I don't think making decisions and moving on this so that it can get done eventually is out of line, because we have 3 other fire stations, and thank God for that. We have other buildings, but we have kept shelving this police station, and eventually we got to do something. Or give the city up to the city of Madison. But you're going to need that public safety piece, unless we can say that crime is going to be extinct. The last piece that I want to bring up is, just look at my notes. When we talk about areas in growth, there's nothing to say that the city can utilize. I don't want to call it a station. I don't want to call it at this time, and looking future, seeing at the pace that the city's growing, that you will need to have an extra station like Madison does, or like your bigger cities, precincts or stations. But what I do see happening here is having space and needs, again, for City Hall to use. Those space needs, and I'll give you an example of what works. I'm not a fan of cop houses, but I am a fan of working with the community, such as like in Milwaukee, Potawatomi saw a neighborhood, Concordia neighborhood, challenged in crime. They buy the building, city pays for the cameras, city pays for some of the security pieces, but in that area, in that parking lot, you have DPW that does meetings that are pertinent to that neighborhood. Police, fire, inspections. Any city entity that is in that neighborhood that needs access to any type of electronic services to beam back to the main office, they can do it there. That type of activity has been great for that community, but we're also looking at what city taxpayers are going to pay and what the community is going to cover through different entities, such as big business. That's how you satellite out of an area like this. You utilize it not just for police, not just for fire, but for city services, so we can all use that. And then we identify the sustainability, so it doesn't cost more money out of our budget. I've noticed and I've seen those things work. So when we look at saying the city's going to grow and the services won't be in those areas, just take that into consideration. Maybe I can find you some literature on that, because that works much better than cop houses. There's an area to come in, and now an area to intervene, to interact with people within that community in a positive manner. I hope I wasn't out of line, because I am passionate about this job.
What is a cop house?
The one, it's on Highland.
No, what does that mean? A cop house?
Oh, there's different cities, like Racine uses cop houses, where it's a house that's donated, but the city ends up taking over that piece. So now you're paying for the janitorial services, you're paying for the electricity, the heating, the cooling of this station, of this house, per se, for cops to use it as office space, so that can help that crime challenged community. That's what cop houses is. You can Google and search that. They do them all. There's places all over the nation, but that's specific to police. And the one that Potawatomi did in Concordia neighborhoods in Milwaukee worked much better, because it was open to city services, not just police, which means you're going to have more traffic there, positive traffic for that community than just police. So I hope I wasn't out of line, but I am passionate about this. Otherwise, I'd be retired. And I'm hoping that my 30 years of experience can help in the decision-making. But each and every one of you do bring great points. And I'm glad you said about bringing other services to Alderman Allen about a police station, because I agree with that. It's a community piece. And I'm hoping that the upcoming design shows that. Because it should be used.
But my bigger issue is, it's not going to happen at this location, because this is the wrong location. Now, I don't expect you to know the whole genesis of all this stuff, because you weren't here. I was. And, you know, at the time this building was built, the police station was specifically put in the basement. It wasn't an afterthought. That was designed to be the police facility. And probably starting around 2009 or 10, there was discussion that was already going on about how the police department was outgrowing that space. So it's been going on a long time. And as I said before, I am not opposed to doing this. I just think this is the absolute wrong location. Now, obviously, I'm just a single vote up here, and I'm probably the only vote who is going to continue to vote against it for that reason. It's not because I don't support the police department or I don't support a police facility, but it's the same reason that I was one of 2 votes that voted against the construction of this building in this spot, because this is the wrong location. And, you know, we who get involved in government and we who work in city staff tend to think in a very city staff-centric way. And we forget about the fact that there's 32,000 people out there who we're supposed to be serving, and they don't get services because of the way we make decisions to be convenient for city staff or for city council or for whatever. And that's what my concern is about, is that we keep putting investment. I don't care how much money we put, I don't care how many buildings we build on this site. This is not going to be a transit location unless we decide to step up and pay for it, which are going to have to. We're definitely going to have to do it. But the reason we're going to have to do it is because of multiple bad decisions that have been made over the years. And now we have a chance to try to do something that would mitigate at least a little bit of that. And there's not any willingness to do it. And I get that. I mean, I understand some of the arguments that have been made up here. I still don't agree with them, but so it goes, you know. Sometimes you win a vote, sometimes you don't, Gabriella.
I appreciate the conversation, but I would like to move adjournment, if we can.
Second that motion.
All right, motion's been made to adjourn and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved.